IB Nation, Notre Dame fans, college football fans, welcome back to another episode of the Irish Breakdown Podcast brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Which means it's time for another Notre Dame football midweek rundown here. Got a handful of different topics to talk about today. It's going to be a really fun show today, man. Part one, we're diving into the best offenses that Notre Dame is going to face in 2026. Believe it or not, the regular season is inching closer and closer. Before you know it, we'll be in July, and then we'll be in fall camp, and then we'll be start our conversations around the Wisconsin Badgers. But what we're going to be doing today is ranking the top 6 offenses that Notre Dame will face in 2026. To follow that up, continuing with the theme of rankings, last week we ranked the top 10 Notre Dame offensive players from 2000 to 2025. Today, we're flipping it, talking about the defensive side of the ball. And this was a very, very competitive ranking to break down. If you guys just start thinking off the top of your heads, what great Notre Dame defensive players have come through the last 25 years. Part 3 today's show, we're continuing previewing the opponents. Up next is the Michigan State Spartans, Notre Dame's third opponent of the regular season. They have a new head coach, new look roster, new look coaching staff. Going to be very fun to dive into the Spartans. And then we're wrapping up today's show with a daily mailbag geared towards some of the topics that we talked about today. So it's going to be a really fun show today, man. I'm looking forward to it.
I am as well. I am. And shared by Big said the best offense they're going to face is LSU in the playoffs. I think we would both be happy about that. You know, because that would mean Notre Dame is in the playoffs, and it would also mean that as soon as Brian Kelly is gone, LSU is in the playoffs, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing and wouldn't be overly shocking when people have finally started to realize who Brian Kelly was. So I'm looking forward to this, Trev. It's going to be a lot of fun. Listen, we want to hear from you guys today. Okay, and obviously we want the chat to kind of be talking about our rankings. We have the top 6 offenses they're going to face. There was some discussion that we had, Trev. There's a team that we don't have on here that we think looking forward, we may look dumb doing that, but there's reasons why they're not on there. And, of course, we get to our top 10 players list. I promise you there's going to be some debate there. Just so everyone hears me now, this is top 10 defensive players from 2000 to 2025, no current players allowed in the conversation. We will talk about them afterwards. So inevitably, somebody's going to say, well, what about, Ross Browner? Last I checked, he didn't play from 2000 to 2025. So we're going to have some fun with that one. And then, of course, we'll preview Michigan State. So we want to hear your guys's. Who are the top offenses? What do you think of our rankings? Who are the top 10 players that you think are there? It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to that. Very much looking forward to that. So, Trev, I'm ready to get this thing rocking and rolling by looking at, having this little conversation about the opponent offenses. It's it's interesting to say the least.
Very, very interesting. You made a comment when we were talking about some of the Notre Dame or some of the defensive lines Notre Dame's offensive line was going to face, and you talked about how this should be a Joe Moore Award winning unit. Yeah. I started to feel that way after we got outside of like the top 2 to 3 teams talking about the top offenses. This should be a year where Notre Dame's defense absolutely eats. And I think that's very reflective in the rankings that we have. Now, when we start talking about best, before we give our rankings, we kind of have to explain what best means. And we evaluated everything from the coaching, the level of talent on the roster, the amount of depth that they have, any sort of returning production. So when we talk about the best teams, it's not just who is the most highly ranked or who has the best outlook on the season. It's a factor, but we're looking at just the offenses here, and that's kind of what we constitute as best.
Yeah, Trev, because it's easy to kind of get into, well, what is best? What does it mean to be best? Is it just who was the best last year? Well, I mean, that's not overly helpful because a lot of these teams have changed. And a lot of teams are completely overhauling their rosters or their coaching staffs or whatever. So it is an attempt to have a projection to 2026. For example, the number 16 we're going to talk about, and I'll bring them up in a second more officially, but we're talking Navy number 6. Well, if we're breaking it off last year, Navy is without a doubt in the top 4. Because of you had. Obviously you had Horvath, you had Teach, you had Blake Heidenreich, you had Chapman, you had a veteran offensive line. Heck, even Braxton Woodson comes off the bench against Notre Dame and rushes for 100 yards. But, a lot of those guys are gone. A couple of those guys, one of those guys got drafted. And so it is an attempt to project forward. And then it's also not just about who's the most talented. It's not about who's the most productive. It's all of those things. What's the scheme? What's the coaching like? Have these offenses been consistent in recent years? So all those things are part of the conversation. But I think when you look at it from a big picture standpoint, Trev, the thing that makes Notre Dame's schedule evaluation intriguing and difficult at times is because there is so much turnover on the rosters of the teams that Notre Dame faces beyond the top three. Like, it almost seems kind of lazy when we're doing all these rankings and we're like, who's the top 10 offensive lines? And we're ranking all these position groups, and almost every time it's like 1, 2, 3 is some version of Miami, SMU, and BYU. And it's like, man, are we getting lazy with some of this? And so then you double check and you're like, yeah, but there's certainty there. You know, when we released our all opponent teams, and there was a lot of BYU, SMU, and Miami, but a lot of them are like almost all juniors and seniors outside of, what's that one safety's name that was barely made our first team? The guy, what's his name? Everybody keeps talking about 6 interceptions.
Was it like Brian Fitzpatrick? What the heck's his name?
Bishop Fitzgerald. No, yes, Bryce. I'm sorry, I had to have some fun with our guy Daly, but you know, other than him, most of the list is juniors and seniors when you look at the Miami, BYU, SMU classes, because there's so many returners on those teams. Even though SMU also has a lot they're turning over, and Miami has some important players, there's a lot coming back. And with some of these other teams, it's like, well, they might be good if their entirely brand new roster of portal guys pans out. And that makes it a little bit challenging. But I think the other part of it, Trevor, is I just don't see a lot of real dynamic offenses on the schedule after really the top two. I mean, even BYU, who we'll talk about here, they're good offense. They're not dynamic. It is a year where, you know, last year, what we said last year about the schedule was, or about the defense was, statistically, the defense could end up being not as good as it was the previous year in the regular season, just comparing the regular season, but actually better, because we felt they were going to play better offenses last year. Now, some of the offenses they played weren't as good. Some were better. You know, they had some good luck, playing Navy without Blake Horvath. Yes, Braxton Woodson did a good job, but he's not Blake Horvath. So I think there's a lot of different aspects to it. This year, it's kind of like, you better rank in the top group of defensively, because when I look at this schedule, Trev, just big picture, I don't see a lot of great offenses of what we know right now. And then there's a couple teams that, they could end up being better. They could end up being better. But overall, I just don't see a lot of big-time offenses on the schedule.
No, neither do I. What makes this schedule so interesting to break down is, let's take last year, for example. When you look at Notre Dame's 25 schedule, to some degrees, we could say that, we think Miami, Texas A&M, and Navy are going to have really good to elite level offenses is what they bring back. Then you have that middle tier. What Notre Dame was missing in this year's schedule is that middle tier of teams. Last year, it was the NC States, the Boise States. Boise State brought back Maddox Madsen. Their stable of running backs behind Ashton Genty brought back a couple. They brought back their tight end, Matt Lauder. So they don't have that on this year's schedule. It's really the top two, arguably three teams, and then a lot of teams that have a lot to prove. And we could have more of a hindsight question once the season is over, but doing these preseason overviews, that's what makes this so difficult, because there's no offense that I confidently say right now, it's like, yep, that's the middle tier. They're going to separate from the bottom tier, the projected bottom tier. It was a fun, interesting ranking to put together.
Yeah, it was. And even some of the middle tier that we have, to your point, Trev, it's not, I don't know that there's a great deal of confidence. Like, oh yeah, this will definitely be the next group of schools on there. I would actually argue that after the first two, there's not a lot of guarantees. In my opinion, not a lot of guarantees on the schedule. So it's going to be interesting. Let's get to that schedule, Trevor, and let's start with we'll rank the number 6 team on the schedule, and that will be the Navy Midshipmen.
We spent a lot of time before the show talking about who do we put at number 6? Is it Navy or is it Syracuse? Because with some of these rankings, as you guys know, we start to split hairs a little bit. There's a lot of things that these opponents have in common. Navy lost Alex Teska. They lost Eli Heidenreich, Blake Horvath. Braxton Woodson is a new quarterback coming back. Whereas Syracuse, they lost Yassine Willis and Justin Ross Simmons and Daryl Gill and Jonte Cook, and Steve Angeli's coming back from a major injury, tore his Achilles last year against Clemson. So that was really the debate. What do we have more certainty about at this point? And Navy brings back 4 of their 5 starting offensive linemen. We've watched their quarterback play against Notre Dame before, and that was the most rushing yards allowed by a single player for Notre Dame's defense last year, which is Braxton Woodson, the quarterback for Navy. So again, to Brian's point, talk about how there are some teams where we could potentially end up looking silly at the end of the year for not having Syracuse in here. There was just at this moment on June 17th of 2026, a little bit more questions about Syracuse. They also are replacing their offensive coordinator. So more pieces shuffling around for the Orange than are the midshipmen. That's why they're number 6 overall on this list.
Yeah. Yeah. Navy is one of those interesting teams that there have been some weird stretches of football, not weird, inconsistent. When they have this quarterback that's been there for a while, there's been times where they're able to go right from that guy to the next guy. But then there's also been stretches where in between this guy to that guy, you end up having some, let's just say, rough years. And, so when you look at, for example, 2015, Notre Dame has, and Navy has Keenan Reynolds at quarterback, right? And just a real, I believe Keenan's last year at Navy was 2015, correct? Yes, I'm looking it up now. One of their better all-time quarterbacks.
Yeah.
And, they're 11-2 that year. They're outstanding. You go out the next year and, they're a 9-win team again because the transition from Keenan Reynolds to Will Worth was really smooth. What was interesting is, Will Worth ended up rushing for 1,000 yards that year and 25 touchdowns, but he did it very differently than Keenan Reynolds did. He was a better passer than Keenan, but he was more of like their version of Riley Leonard, bigger, physical downhill back, where Keenan was an athletic guy that was going to pitch and get on the perimeter. And then you go, you move forward and you say, okay, well, then the next year they're 7-6. Will Worth was a 1-year starter, and that's all eligibility he had. And you had Zach Abey and Garrett Lewis, and they just weren't the same, And then the next year, 2018, with Garrett Lewis and Zach Abey, and you barely have a little bit of Malcolm Perry at the end, they were bad. They were 3-10, and their offense really struggled. And ranked 96 in the country in scoring offense. The next year, 2019, they're 11-2 and scoring 37 points in the country, ranking 12th in the country. Why? Malcolm Perry takes over quarterback, and he's dynamic.
Yeah.
Rushes for 2,000 yards, passes for 1,000 yards. And then the next year they're 3-7 because Malcolm Perry was, again, a 1-year starter. And then, they weren't very good. And then they had, 3 down years because they couldn't find the right quarterback. They had some just really struggle with quarterback. And then 2024, Blake Horvath steps into the mix. They win 10 games. Offense makes a big jump forward. And then this year, again, they win 11 games, and Blake Horvath is a big part of it. So they're a team that you just don't know what you're going to get from year to year, and a lot of it has to do with the quarterback. Quarterback and fullback are the 2 most important positions in the triple option as far as like the skill positions by a mile, and they have to replace both of those guys.
Yep.
And that's not going to be easy. So I think we still have them here because of, Trev kept saying, we'd say, what about this with Navy? We're worried about the fact they lost Teach. We're worried about the fact that, or excuse me, Teska. I said Teach earlier. I'm still having flashbacks to 2010 when Alexander Teach and Ricky Dobbs were destroying Notre Dame. Teska, Alex Teska, and so, but you lost him, and that's a problem. And you lost Chapman at slot. You lost Heidenreich. Man, he got drafted. And then Trev's response kept being, but I watched Braxton Woodson run all over Notre Dame in the first half of that game. Well, yeah, it's fair. I think that's really what it comes down to because they have the quarterback that we have seen be successful. And a week later, he comes off the bench and rushes for 100 yards again in a half against South Florida in an upset win over South Florida. So it's not like it was just like, okay, that one time Notre Dame wasn't prepared for him. He did it again the next week. He brings more of the Ricky Dobbs, Malcolm Perry style of play. And so I'm curious to see how the offensive coordinator does that. But the other part of it, true, Trev, is there is a system in place right now that creates a little bit more certainty with what Navy will be compared to what they have been in the past. I mean, to what? So I should say, yes, compared to what they've done in the past, because I don't think they're as dependent on a running quarterback that can do
Right.
different things. But I also think the other part of it is there's even the consistency of the system, the discipline of the program leaves a little bit more certainty compared to some other teams in the schedule who maybe end up being better. But I think as of right now, and we'll talk at the end of this, a couple teams that we would say are next in line that could maybe jump into this. But that's just the consistency of Navy is why we have them here.
Yep, without a doubt. FanDuel did also just release their over-under win totals for some G5 schools. Navy's right now is at 8.5. Very interested to see where they end up at the end of the season, for sure. Our number 5 team, continuing with this ranking, Brian, is actually the Michigan State Spartans. You and I are a big fan of what they've done so far this offseason. And, there's a lot of talk about, new head coach, new regime. You lost guys like Nick Marsh, your quarterback from last year transferred. But there's a lot of bright spots for this team. And we both really love what they did in the portal. Now, they have Alisio Milivojevic coming back. That's my best guess at how to pronounce his name. But they got some really good pickups in the portal, including Notre Dame wide receiver KK Smith. They have some experience coming back on the offensive line. Their left tackle, right guard, and right tackle also come back. This is an offense that could make a jump this upcoming season, and we're kind of predicting them to do it based on what this ranking is right now. You're muted, Brian.
Trev, I think this is a team that when we look back on it, we're going to either look really smart because we're projecting so much with this team. Hey, great call on Michigan State, guys. You really nailed that one. Not a lot of people were thinking they were going to be this, but you guys had them down and great call. Oh, we're going to be like, you guys are idiots. I cannot believe you guys thought Michigan State was going to actually be good this year, because there's a lot about what you just look at on paper and you look at the lack of proven production. You're walking into a situation where the offense was pretty terrible. I mean, for stretches of last season, a lot of turmoil. I mean, this is a team that averaged 24.6 points per game last year, Trev. They weren't exactly lighting the world on fire on offense last year. Finished the year 89th in the country. Your quarterback's a kid who was part of that, last season. And you're relying on a lot of portal offensive linemen. Your receiving core is portal guys. You're starting running back as a portal guy. But the reality is there's more proof of concept now in college football that you can rebuild through the portal and be really good.
Yep.
We just watched Miami last year completely rebuild their secondary and their skill positions with one true freshman and a bunch of portal guys. Quarterback, receiver, secondary, and they go and make it to the playoff and then make a run to the championship game. We saw Indiana do that. Now, again, different type of situation, but we've seen now Ole Miss makes the playoff last year with a bunch of portal guys. There's more proof that if you do it right, you can actually rebuild in the portal in a hurry. We're not saying Michigan State's going to come all the way back, but it is a situation where I think you're going to look at it and say, hey, they're going to take a step forward. But I also just think the big thing that they need offensively, Travis, they just need some level of calm, just stability. And I don't know that they had that last year in a lot of ways. There was just a lot of chaos in the program last year. You bring in Nick Sheridan as your OC from Alabama. You've got Pat Fitzgerald as your head coach. I just think there's more stability in there now.
Agree completely. I'm starting to go through and watching film of some of the schools that Notre Dame faces this season. Obviously, I'm trying to pay more attention to the back half of Michigan State's season when the Alisio kid took over at quarterback. But you're 100% right. They were an offense last year with no identity. Like, they were just kind of each week, it felt like they were throwing something against the wall, hope that it stuck. And obviously, based on what their season-ending ranking was, it was not sticking. Mm-hmm. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think the stability is going to be.
And it was frustrating because when you watched them at the start of the season, you're like, hey, man, they've got a chance. Like, I watched that BC game and I'm like, boy, what a great performance that was. Mm-hmm. I mean, man, I've always been real high on Aiden Childs, and you watch him throw for 400 or 4 touchdown passes in that game. He, next week against Youngstown State, he, goes for 270 yards, 9.3 yards per attempt. They lose to USC, and it wasn't the offense's fault. Aiden Childs completes 12 passes for 212 yards and 3 touchdowns and no picks. And you're like, hey, this offense is going to be pretty good. Scored 27 points the next week against Nebraska. He was terrible, and then the wheels fell off. In the last 6 games, they scored 20 points twice, and they were less than 20 points every other game until the last game of the season against Maryland, when they did pretty well on offense in that game and had some success in that game. And I think that game is a big reason why, the quarterback is now being counted upon, because the last 2 games, he put up big numbers. Last 2 games of the year, he had 547 yards in 2 games, 6 touchdowns, 2 picks. Now, threw a lot of passes. He threw 81 passes. But he showed some things. We're like, oh, maybe they might be all right with this guy at quarterback. And so, but he's just going to need some weapons around him, which I think they went out and got. So the big thing for me too, Trevor's, is where I'm banking on a lot of this. We've talked about, I love KK Smith coming back. You guys all know that we're high on KK Smith. It just, unfortunately for KK, he was at Notre Dame at a time when this is the deepest they've been at receiver in a long time. That's just the reality of it. Frederick Moore's got talent from Michigan. They're decent talent at tight end, but I really like Cam Edwards at running back, the kid from UConn, 1,200-yard rusher last year, really good player. I love the Trent Fraley pickup at center, transfer from North Dakota State, son of Hank Fraley, a longtime NFL player. As you guys remember, I had Nick Sharp, the transfer guard from Ole Miss, who was at Wake Forest. I have him as my first-team all opponent guard. Ben Morosky, the left tackle from the portal, good player. The big thing for me is I think their offensive line is going to be a lot better this year. And part of that is I think Nick Tabak is a very good offensive line coach. They hired him from Wake. Nick Sharp played for him at Wake. That's part of the reason for me. He's a kid that, yes, he came from Ole Miss, but he's only there for a year. He played for Nick Tabaka before that. And so I've had a chance to actually get to know Nick, not like as friendly, but like working camps where he was at. I know his offense well, or his offensive line performance as well. He's got some talent to work with, Trev, and that's why I think that's going to be a big reason why I think Michigan State's going to bounce back this year, because I do have some level of confidence in their offensive line coach and the system they're bringing in, and just the talent that they brought in. I think they brought in good talent this season.
I'm with you. Speaking of bringing in talent, start talking about our number 4 team on this ranking. That's the Wisconsin Badgers. I have not been shy around the fact that I think that Wisconsin is due for a bounce back season. In the same light of Michigan State, I don't think bounce back means that they're going to be fighting for a spot in the college football playoffs. I don't think that means they're going to be playing the Oregon Ducks or the Ohio State Buckeyes or the Indiana Hoosiers for the Big Ten championship. But I think they're going to be a bowl-eligible team that has more than 6 wins. And a big reason for that is some of the additions that they made on their offensive side of the ball in the offseason. We talked a lot about Colton Joseph from Old Dominion. I like their running back pickups. You got Brian Jackson from USC. You got Abu Sama III from Iowa State. You got Shamar Rigby, a wide receiver from Oklahoma State. Again, similar to Brian's point about Michigan State, we now have more of a track record of teams building through the portal, and they still have some players that are coming back from last year's team to kind of help maintain whatever culture Luke Fickell has right now up in Madison. I think that this is going to be an offense that, I'm very careful on whatever type of culture it is. But I think this is a year where the offensive skill talent for Wisconsin is better than what it has been in quite some time.
Well, the biggest thing is they've also wasted some skill talent in recent years.
Yeah.
Because of they just haven't been able to find a quarterback. I mean, that's really a big thing. They might have the deepest running back room on the schedule for anyone other than Miami. I mean, I'm being a dead serious comment.
100%.
When because of the portal, right? I mean, you've already got Darian Dupree coming back. He was a nice, good third down back for them last year. Good player. Notre Dame recruited him out of high school a little bit. Abu Sama, kid they got from Iowa State. It's a good football player. Rushed for over 700 yards last year. He had over 5 yards a carry. He's been over 5 yards a carry twice in his career. He was 7.3 yards per carry as a freshman in 2023 at Iowa State. This is a kid that's got 1,800 career rushing yards and 13 career rushing touchdowns, and he's going to be running behind a pretty big offensive line. Now, how good it's going to be remains to be seen. We're going to see, but I think there's a chance for this offensive line to be okay. Big thing for their offensive line, and big thing for their offense in general, Trev, is they really, 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 really need Kevin Haywood to step up and be the guy people thought he was coming out of high school. I think he was ranked as a top 100 recruit coming out of high school, and he hasn't done a thing at Wisconsin so far. But, they got P.J. Wilkins out of the portal, which you talked about. Emerson Mandel's coming back. So, it's kind of a remade offensive line, but it's an offensive line that's got some ability. I worry about how good they're going to be at tackle and pass pro. That's a concern of mine. But they went out and got a running quarterback because they want to run the football. That's the reality of it. That's why Wisconsin went out and got Colton Joseph. They didn't go get Colton Joseph. If they did, they're idiots to turn into, their version of Jimmy Clausen. They went out and got him to turn into their version of Riley Leonard. That's kind of what they're looking to do. So when I look at it, Trev, that's really the thing that you look at. You're going into year 2 of Jeff Grimes' system. That should help the returners. But it's like you said, they brought in some good players. I think they had a good portal offseason. And you've been talking about this even before me, because I had you write an article. I said, hey, Trev, let's do an article about what the opposing teams did in the portal. Just general statement of something that I think would be interesting for fans to read. And one of the first things you said after you did the research was, dude, I really like what they did in the portal. I think Wisconsin had a really sneaky good portal season, which is on both sides of the ball. And Colton Joseph is a big part of that. It's a big part of the reason we think they're going to be a better team this year. It's a big part of the reason we have them as the 4th best offense on the schedule. It's a big part of the reason that say, boy, this team's going to get better running the football because they're pretty terrible running the football last year. They have a brand new backfield. But again, their offense was bad the last 2 years. But they had better talent, in my opinion, overall than what we saw the last 2 years. It was real. Their quarterback play was just that bad. It really was. And I think that's getting Colton Joseph is a big reason why that I think that they're going to take a jump.
Without a doubt. I think at one point last year they were down to like their 3rd or 4th string quarterback because of injuries and just trying somebody new.
Because didn't Billy Edwards get hurt in like the 1st or 2nd game of the year?
I think it was in the first quarter of the first game of the year or something.
It was like he didn't play at all. You're right, Trev. He 2nd game of the year. His first quarter of the 2nd game of the year.
Jeez.
It is what it was. No, actually, it was in the first game, and then he came back against Maryland and got hurt again. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, you're right. It was the first game. He passed for a grand total of 113 yards last year. They got 16 attempts out of their starting quarterback last year.
Whew.
Yep.
That's not great. Yep. Definitely
not great. It's not great at all. So yeah, they're just look at this last year. Their quarterbacks passed for 1,637 yards, 9 touchdowns, 13 interceptions last year. That's what they did last season. I want to give some context to that because I think this is an interesting thing to point out. So I say normal offense stylistically passed for 1,600 yards, 9 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, 6.0 yards per attempt. I'd like to also point out that last season, Trevor, Air Force passed for 1,742 yards, 10.6 yards per attempt, 13 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions. I'd also like to point out last year that Navy passed for 1,690 yards, 12 touchdowns, 6 picks, 9.3 yards per attempt. They were less productive in the pass game than 2 of the 3 triple option teams were last year. That is not good.
Yeah, that's rough.
And it wasn't because Jeff Grimes has no idea how to build a decent passing offense. That's not why. You know what I mean? That's not why. It's because their quarterback play was that bad. So I think that's a big reason why we both have them jumping. And I also think a reason why we have them jumping up, Trevor, is because of what you said at the outset. There's a bit of a gap right now between the top 3 teams and everybody else. So that's something to think about too. Like, of these teams we're not sure of, we think they may have the best. That's kind of where I look at it.
100%. Number 3 team on this ranking for us, Brian, is the BYU Cougars. And at the start of the show, I talked about how there might not be a middle-tier team. This might be the middle-tier offense that Notre Dame will face this year. I like what they have coming back. They have some good pieces. But BYU, they kind of encompass the saying they are what they are. I don't see Bear Bachmeier going out and lighting it up for 4,000 passing yards this year. There's a chance that he ends up with more rushing touchdowns than passing touchdowns. Not because I think he has 6 passing touchdowns at the end of the year. He's just a dual threat guy. I think they have one of the best backfields, talking quarterback, running back, coming back on Notre Dame's schedule this year. But overall, I have a lot of questions about the skilled talent on the perimeter, but they're the number 3 team on this list. They have a returning starting quarterback. They're always going to be sound and disciplined and physical on the offensive line. And they have one of the best running backs that Notre Dame will face on their schedule in LJ Martin.
Yeah, he's our first team all opponent running back. I think Miami has the better backfield, meaning like running back depth chart. They're 2, 3, and 4 better, I think, than BYU's 2, 3, and 4. But I think LJ Martin is the best individual running back that Notre Dame will face this year. Mark Fletcher being the next best. You talk about Bear Bachmeier coming back after the success he had last season. Receiver is a bit of a question mark, Trev. We've talked about that. Obviously, you lost one of your top receivers last year to graduation. Another one of your top receivers is most likely going to get kicked off the team. I don't know. Has that officially happened yet?
I don't think so.
I don't know that that's officially happened yet, but so you're probably not going to have Parker Kingston. You're probably not going to have Chase Roberts. You're not going to have your tight end Carson Ryan. So your top 3 pass catchers from last year are all gone. Your top pass catcher coming back this year that wasn't a running back had 14 catches for 161 yards. So obviously that's a bit of a concern. You have Tiger Bachmeier coming back, who's Bear's brother, had 7 catches last year. He hasn't proven a whole lot. You get Kyler Casper transferring in from Oregon. That's a bit of a wild card. I think if Kyler Casper can be the guy that he was coming out of high school, he's a 6'6" kid that's a pretty decent athlete. He's only got 5 career catches at Oregon, but he also was at Oregon during a time. It's kind of like he's like the KK Smith for BYU. Part of the reason he didn't play a whole lot at Oregon, in my opinion, is look who was at Oregon during his tenure at Oregon. I think that's part of it as well. And I don't know that he necessarily fit Will Stein's offense real well. He likes he has had success with bigger receivers. Malik Benson had a nice year last year, but he doesn't necessarily value as much the tall jump ball kind of guy as much as the Evan Stewarts, the Tez Johnsons, the DeCorian Moores, those kind of guys. So I think Kyler fits that system better. I love the Walker Lions pickup, but here's ultimately why BYU is number 3 for me, Trev. This is the best offensive line coming back on Notre Dame's schedule.
Yep.
And I don't know that it's overly close preseason. Now, could Miami's offensive line, could SMU's offensive line end up being better by the end of the year? Certainly it's possible. But as far as returners and what we know, BYU has the best offensive line coming back because they've got basically 4 starters coming back. You and I we both had Bruce Mitchell on our all-opponent team. We both had right tackle Andrew Gentry on our all-opponent team. You had one guard on your all-opponent team. I had the other guard on our all-opponent team. And we also mentioned how Apaki Fanau is a guy coming in as a transfer that I like. I think he's going to do some good things. That's really the thing about BYU is I don't think BYU has the upside and potential to be a big play, big scoring offense like SMU and Miami. But they're going to be a really good ground and pound team that if Kyler Casper and Walker Lions can be impact transfers, which they have a chance to be, they could end up being still a good big play receiving offense, even though it won't look like it did last year. But I think their ability to run the football this year is going to be really good. Really good.
As do I. If BYU, I view this as kind of their ceiling on the rankings. The only way that I see them moving up is if one of Miami or SMU doesn't live up to expectation, or if Wisconsin makes a drastic jump, I could see there being movement for BYU. But I think 3 on Notre Dame's schedule is their ceiling here. Speaking of SMU, go ahead.
I will say this. I think the only way that they don't finish 3rd is either one of 2 things. Somebody passes them up, or SMU or Miami disappoint.
Yeah.
I don't think their ceiling is that they can catch and surpass those other 2 teams if those other 2 teams just play good football to their potential this year. I think it would require SMU to struggle or Miami to struggle. That's the only way I think they get. They're not 3rd. But it's going to be harder for some of those other teams to catch them because of their offensive line.
Agreed completely. Speaking of SMU, that's our number 2 ranked team, the Mustangs, who Notre Dame faced on Senior Day this year. By far the most difficult Senior Day opponent that I can remember them having in quite some time. And one of the reasons for that is because of the outlook of what their offense has coming back this year. Kevin Jennings is one of the most experienced quarterbacks on the schedule. I mean, at the school that he's at, the most experienced quarterback
Certainly
that Notre Dame will face on this schedule. We had a couple of guys on their offensive line on our all-opponent teams. We both had Addison Nichols. You had P.J. Williams. I had Joshua Bates on mine.
You had 2. I had 2.
Yep.
And then, but our 2 weren't the same.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. The only same one that I think we both had was Addison Nichols.
Mm-hmm. And both had him first team, I believe, correct?
Correct. Yes,
and then
sir.
You had Josh Bates on your first team, and then I had P.J. Williams on my first team.
Yep.
So we both had 2 of their offensive linemen on the first team. Yep.
Now, they did lose some pieces. Romello Brinson is gone. Jordan Hudson's gone. TJ Harden, their running back, is gone. But that's where you start using the portal to supplement. Mm-hmm. First and foremost, they have Ymir Knight coming back, and they have Jalen Cooper coming back. And I'm really high on Jalen Cooper this year. I think he's going to have a big year. Then in the portal, you get Kendrick Raphael from Cal. I mean, he was a guy that rushed for 13 touchdowns last year, 943 yards. They also got Yannick Smith from East Carolina.
Including 111 yards against SMU in an upset win late in the last game of the regular season against SMU. So it wasn't even just that he did well last year. He also he hammered them. Just ground and pound them into oblivion in that game last year.
100%. So they got an on-field look of what his impact could be. Exactly. You know what I mean? I'm with you. They got a front row seat. I mean, you also mentioned some of the tight end pickups that they have. Obviously, they lost Matthew Hibner from last year, but they went out to the portal. They got the kid from Texas A&M, Thilo Malin Ostrom, and then Randy Pittman Jr. from Florida State. So very interested to see how they pan out as well.
Yeah, and look, they got a backup tight end from Texas Tech. Look, I love Trey. You know this man, or Trev. You know this man. I'm very high on Jalen Cooper.
Yeah,
but the reason he wasn't necessarily on our all opponent first team is because he's just not as proven. Whereas you look at Ymir Knight, he's at the G5 level in 2024, has 53 catches for 605 yards, 11.4 yards per touchdown, or per catch, 4 touchdowns. Transfers to SMU and literally repeats those numbers with some slight improvement. He has 54 catches, jumps up to 637 yards, has 11.8 yards per catch, and 5 touchdowns. And so you don't often see G5 kids move up to the Power 4 and just immediately produce better. Well, now he goes into his second year in the offense, second year playing with Kevin Jennings. And I think the supporting cast around him is going to be pretty good as well, especially if Jalen Cooper's as good as we think that he can be. And then, of course, they got, they went to the portal, got Yannick Smith. I'm not quite sure how good he's going to be as far, will he be a difference maker? He was pretty good at East Carolina last year, 44 last 2 years, really. He combined for 69 catches for 1,017 yards. 8 touchdowns, shorter, Ymir Knight's the shorter guy. Jalen Cooper and Yannick Smith are more like outside vertical kind of guys. Jalen Cooper 6'2", Yannick Smith is 6'3". I think there's some stuff to work with there, Trev, that says, hey, look, I think this kid's got a chance to help them and complements them real well. So I really like their pass catching weapons. And you mentioned the receivers. Randy Pittman was at UCF and Florida State. There's some legit weapons. And Randy Pittman, and I think you're also going to see a lot of 12 personnel from them because Theo and Randy Pittman are very different tight ends. Theo's more of a Y, can move around, but more of a Y, tall type of guy. And then Pittman's more of like how RJ Maryland was for them the last couple of years at tight end. So I think the weapons there are very good. Their offense has a chance to be better than Miami's this year if Miami's offensive line doesn't figure it out pretty quickly. This has a chance to be a really good offense. Miami and SMU are significantly 1 and 2. Yeah. There's a big gap between 1 and 2 and 3, and then there's a gap from 3 and everybody else.
Yeah.
So even though Miami, BYU, and SMU are kind of the 3 top teams clearly, and then everybody else offensively, there's separation between 1 and 2.
Without a doubt. And number one overall on this list, Brian, it's the Miami Hurricanes. Not really a whole lot of suspense here. You talk about returning production. You go back to what our criteria was. You talk about the coaching staff. Well, they bring back their offensive coordinator, one of the better offensive line coaches in the business. You talk about the talent on their team. They had one of the better portal cycles in the country, let alone just on Notre Dame's schedule. You talk about the depth. There are some question marks depending on the spot, but skill position depth, there's a reason why in yesterday's show we ranked Miami's present and immediate future ahead of Notre Dame in that sense. And then the proven production, they're the only team on Notre Dame's schedule and one of the only few in the country that returned 2 1,000-yard receivers to their roster this year. So
and a 1,000-yard running back also.
Yeah. So this Miami's the number one clear-cut team. I don't know if there's much debate here. There could be. But
I actually think there is a debate because of the offensive line. That's where I think the debate comes from. And because, like, look, if we're talking about last year's offenses, SMU was better than Miami last year. They scored more points per game in the same conference. They outplayed Miami's offense in a game against each other. I mean, so, a game that SMU won last year. So I just look at it, Trevor. I just think that they have an argument to make, and I think SMU is going to be even better this year. So I think there's at least a debate, but between you and I, it's a debate that someone else can make, and I won't tell them they're nuts, but it's not a debate that you and I are going to have. I think Miami is clearly number one when you look at what we're talking about, which is projection. Miami has the better talent. They have the better backfield against SMU. They have a better receiving core than SMU. I think SMU has the better tight end room. SMU has the most experienced, proven offensive line. If we're looking at the two starting offensive lines and we're like, who are the guys that we're most certain of? In my opinion, it's Addison Nichols and PJ Williams. In your opinion, it might be Josh Bates and Addison Nichols. But if we're saying who are the two most talented offensive linemen, well, those are at Miami, Samson Okunlola and Jackson Cantwell.
Mm-hmm.
And, you look at quarterback, I think Kevin Jennings is a very good player, most experienced. I don't think he's as good as Darian Mensah. Backfield, clear advantage to Miami. Receiving core, that's closer than people think, but Miami is definitely better. It's just not like, oh my gosh,
sure.
It's crazy how much no one else is good. Miami's clearly number one. SMU is clearly number two receiving core on Notre Dame's schedule. But it's the quarterback aspect of it. It's the receiver. It's the running. It's the running backs. It's all of it coming together. And I think Miami's offense this year, somebody in the chat said, my guy Harold in the chat said that they might be the best offense in the country, much less on Notre Dame's schedule. I'm not ready to go there yet because I have some questions about the offensive line and we need to see Mensah in the system and all that kind of stuff. But I don't think he's completely out of pocket for making that comment.
No.
Like I get it because I think this offense is going to look a lot more like the 24 offense than it is last year's offense.
Yeah.
When they were, by the way, number one in the country in scoring, total yards, and yards per play.
Yeah, absolutely. Because outside of the quarterback position, not saying that Darian Mensah couldn't. I just don't know if he's going to have a Cam Ward type of season like he had in 24. But, I mean, talk about like receiving core for receiving core. Absolutely.
Yeah. And that was a really good group of offensive skill players, Trev. In 2024, but it's not as good.
No, I'm taking Malachi Tony over Xavier Restrepo.
Yeah, he's a good player. I'd take Cooper Barcotti over Xavier Restrepo, to be honest with you. Jacoby George is a good player. Isaiah Horton's a guy that we're high on. Elijah Rojo was a very good football player, but I think this group is even better. Yeah, I do.
To bring this segment kind of to an end, I did have a question for you before we switch over. Talked about the gaps. We talked about the gaps in between 2 and 3, and then the gaps between 3 and 4. Would you say right now going into the season, BYU is closer to SMU than what Wisconsin is to BYU, or do you think it's a pretty even gap?
I would say right now of what we know, it's an even gap. I mean, look, Trev, when you look at BYU last year, just kind of what they did, they had basically the same scoring average that Miami had last year, but slightly better. They were 31.4. Miami was 30.9. And, when you look at total offense, they had Miami had 405 yards last year. BYU's at 399.5. So that's slightly advantage Miami. BYU was at 6 yards a play. Miami was at 6.1 yards a play. They basically had the same offense last year. It's just, I think Miami's is going to get a lot better. So I think BYU is a quality offense. I just think there's a bit of a gap between them and the other two. I would say it's an even gap. If I were to have to say, okay, you can't say even, Brian, you got to pick one, right? You can't hold it. You got to pick one. I'd say it's closer to SMU than it is anybody else. That's what I would say. It's a good question, Queb. My question for you is, Trevor, who are the next 2 or 3 teams, in your opinion, that you could see jumping into this? I know there was one team that we initially had on the list that we took off because of some question marks, but we think could jump in there. Who are the top 2 or 3 teams on the schedule that you could see jumping into this mix?
Yeah, jumping into the mix, Syracuse you have to put into consideration. I like what they bring back on the offensive line. And then obviously Steve Angeli was on a tear before he got hurt. Biggest question for them, like I said, is who is his supporting cast? They went to the portal. They got a running back, Ahmad Miller from Jackson State. They got Elijah Moore, big-bodied guy from Florida State. Cole Weaver from Miami of Ohio. But can they be Jonte Cook? Can they be Darryl Gill? Can they be Yassine Willis? That remains to be seen. Another team that I have my eye on, and quarterback play will basically determine the entire outlook for really these next two, is North Carolina and Stanford. With as wide open as the bottom half of Notre Dame's schedule is, it wouldn't shock me with what Stanford brings back that they have a top 6 offense on Notre Dame's schedule. I just don't have a lot of confidence in Davis Warren. Yep. Maybe DeVita Pritchard and Andrew Luck can get a little bit more out of him than what Sharon Moore did. I think that's a very valid argument, but I'm not willing to bet on it yet. And then with North Carolina, for me at least, I had Jordan Shipp on one of my all-opponent teams. Demon
First
June
team.
First
team. I had him second team. You had him first team.
Yeah. Demon June is going into his sophomore season. It's just they are more so than Stanford relying on a lot more portal additions, but I like their portal additions. They got Tretch Kekahuna from Wisconsin. They got Jelani Thurman from Ohio State, Jordan Washington from Texas. So they have good individual pieces. Interested to see what Bobby Petrino can do with them.
Look, Trev, the big thing for me, I have a hard time jumping on board. They also got Caleb Jackson from the portal. And, Demond June was a good player last year, but he only had 84 carries.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, how good is he going to be now as a sophomore? Is like what he did as a freshman was like, okay, that's just kind of who he is, or is there another jump for him as a sophomore? I mean, we're going to find that out. It's the quarterback piece for me.
Yeah.
If Billy Edwards is their starting quarterback all year, I don't think they're going to be in this conversation. I mean, Billy Edwards is okay. He had 2,800 yards at Maryland a couple years ago, 15 touchdowns, 9 picks, 4 rushing. I mean, he's okay. But I just, coming off of a big injury and just, I don't know what they're going to be. I do think their receiving core has some potential. I think their offensive line has some potential. But they've got a lot more to prove to me than some of those other teams on the schedule, Trev. I think you nailed Syracuse, as a team that has a chance to their thing is, look, you still have Jeff Nixon as your offensive coordinator. You still have Steve Angeli, who led them to, what I think ranked number 1 in the country in passing yards per game last year prior to his injury. It's just, you're once again going through so much turnover. That's a bit of the challenge. And here's a team that I'm very curious about, Trev, that they've been so bad the last couple of years, and they were so disappointing last year that I'm just not really willing to jump on the bandwagon of, hey, they're going to be better this year. But I thought Purdue was going to be better.
I agreed. Ryan Brown kind of disappointed me last year.
Very much so. And if he would have played better last year, then I might have more optimism about them. Look, I like the Xavier Townsend pickup. Notre Dame looked at him. I did not like him for Notre Dame. I really like him for Purdue as a slot receiver. And he can actually play some outside too. But, I like him as a return guy. BC Owens is a good player. Asad Wasim is a good football player that they got out of the portal. Corey Smith is a kid that's from Georgia. He's back. Their offensive line, you got Joey Tanona coming back, but then you got a couple good transfers. The running back, I think they did well at running back, Trev. Getting the kid from Minnesota who was their number 2 rusher last year. Thank you. Getting Jarrett Gibson from Texas. was a big one last year. So there's a lot for Purdue as well that I like to work with. Anybody else on the list, Trev?
No, outside of Stanford, like I mentioned, but again, my concerns with Stanford are the same with North Carolina. I just have very little faith about having Davis Warren at quarterback. I like what they bring back, though. I like the fact that they have a couple of offensive linemen. I believe you had Nicky Prongos on one of your all-opponent teams. Micah Ford is a quality running back. I like some of the pickups that they made in the portal, but I'm not ready to predict them jumping into the top 6 because when a lot of your offensive success relies around the success of Davis Warren under center, leaves me real hesitant. But that's another team that I'm keeping my eye on.
Now, Andrew Gilmore, every time we talk about Stanford, makes a comment about how Stanford's really high on their freshman quarterback, Michael Mitchell, and they are. And, we've heard some good things about him. But again, I don't know how much I want to put Stanford in this conversation because of a 5'10" freshman. Like, is that say, boy, he's going to be a good player someday? Or is it more of a, that's how bad Davis Warren is kind of conversation?
Sure.
You know what I mean? So, but yeah, you are correct, though. I was glad you mentioned Stanford because that is a team that if their quarterback play is just solid, they're going to be a decent offense this year. I like their offensive line. I think their receiving core, they've got some decent talent at receiving core. They got a freshman that I love. Everybody talks about, the quarterback. I love Zion Robinson. He's a kid they flipped from Michigan. I would have taken him last year. If he was interested in Notre Dame, I would have taken him. He's a good football player. Obviously, Micah Ford, Cedric Irvin, there's experience there. If they can figure out the quarterback position, if just get solid play from quarterback, they will be better this year. They're not going to be great. This isn't going to be like vintage Stanford from 2011 and 10 and 9 and stuff like that. They're just going to be better. And that's the big thing, so can Nico Brown be the next Ivy League guy like Cooper Barcotti was? Is he going to do for Stanford what Cooper Barcotti did for Miami? Transferred from the Ivy League and goes to, a P5 school or P4 school and dominates. That's obviously what Stanford is hoping happens. But it's just the uncertainty at quarterback is the problem that I have.
Brian, last week on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, we ranked our top 10, offensive players from 2000 to 2025. Now today, we get to do the same, but for the defensive side of the ball. Quick disclaimer for everybody. 2000 to 2025 with no current players on the team. Let's call a spade here. Leonard Moore is going to be on this list the second he leaves Notre Dame. We just can't rank him there yet.
Right. Yeah, we're choosing not to because we're looking at it, from the past. Guys that have finished their careers at Notre Dame. We'll talk about some guys that could be on this list when it's all said and done at the end of the show. So here's what we're going to do. Trev's going to give his 10 to 6 and just list them. Then I'll list my 10 to 6, and then we'll kind of talk about it and have some fun with it about, guys that we thought there's some similarities here. There's definitely some carryover between our two lists. There's also some differences. Trev, I also think that you have to share a bit of a caveat that you have about your ranking, because your ranking is going to have two guys not in it that if you weren't 28 years old would absolutely 29 now would absolutely be in it. So we've always talked about how we talk about guys we know when you talk about best ever. Trev has like this. Well, you explain it, Trev. It's your deal. So there's two guys that I have high on my list that you won't have, and there's a reason why.
Yeah, the two guys are Shane Walton and Courtney Watson, a linebacker from the early 2000s. The unfortunate thing about my youth is the fact that I don't really have that great of a memory of Notre Dame from 2000 to 2003, 2004-ish range. Now, there's one player that I'll talk about later on this list that I do have on there that was a defensive end at Notre Dame in 2004. I'm sure you guys know where I'm going with this. I'll explain more when we get to that player, but you won't see those two other players that I mentioned on my list just because I would have nothing outside of their accolades to talk about. Mm-hmm. I can't reference, man, do you remember in this game when he had this pick or broke up this pass? I just won't bring any of that to the table. All of my analysis would have been he was basically reading off of the page that Notre Dame has for him. So if somebody is like, hey, why don't you have him on the list? Those players should be. Shane Walton is in the top 10 from 2000 to 2025. He's just not on mine because I just can't speak to it.
Yep.
That's why.
Just fair. So we kind of debated this a little bit beforehand, and I thought it was just good to say, hey, man, just instead of me trying to talk you into why they should be on the list or you just reading off accolades, just tell people why your list is a little bit different than mine. And I thought that was very fair. So let's kind of go down through it, Trev. First, give your 10 to 6. I'll give mine, and then we'll talk through the players and why they're there.
Yeah, absolutely. My number 10 player I have on my list is safety Kyle Hamilton. Number 9 is Victor Abiamiri, defensive end. Number 8 is linebacker Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. Number 7 is Isaiah Foskey. And number 6 is cornerback Julian Love.
So I have a tie at 10. I have Victor Abiamiri and Kyle Hamilton. I just could not figure out which one of those to drop. And so I said, hey, you know what? Since I can't really decide which one to drop, I'm going to keep them both on there. 9 is Isaiah Foskey. 8 is Shane Walton. 7 is Harrison Smith. 6 is Julian Love. So Victor Abiamiri, Kyle Hamilton, Isaiah Foskey, and Julian Love are the 4 that we have in common here, Trev. We also both have Victor Abiamiri and Kyle Hamilton at the bottom of our list, and let's kind of talk about those a little bit. I'll kind of start a little bit with Kyle Hamilton. The reason that Kyle ranks, I would assume, a lot lower on the list than I would think a lot of people in the chat would probably have him or on the list, or maybe that they don't have a list but thought where he would be on our list. But here's the reality. Notre Dame's had a lot of great defensive players, and you could argue that Kyle Hamilton should be higher in this list just from a pure talent standpoint. But as we've said before, talent is part of the conversation. If it wasn't, he's not even on my list at all. Kyle Hamilton was a heck of a player at Notre Dame, but just for an entire career, which is what this is about, he had 1 full season as a starter. That's it. 1. He was a important rotation player as part of a 3-safety rotation as a true freshman, and then only played half the year in 2021, the year he was an All-American. Now, I think that was dumb to make him All-American, but I also thought it was dumb not to have him as All-American in 2020. So I think it was kind of a makeup, like, hey, we screwed the kid over last year, so let's give it to him anyway. He was very, very impactful in the 6 games he played, but it's a year and a half. So when I'm comparing him to 4 years of Harrison Smith and 3 years of Xavier Watts and, the careers of a lot of these players, it's hard to have him over there. Somebody said they'd have Alohi Gilman over Kyle Hamilton. Okay, that's fair. But again, Kyle's best was still better than Alohi's best, and Alohi only played 2 years in Notre Dame. So he's going to have a similar problem that he just doesn't have the longevity that some of these guys have. There was a player that's not on my list that I strongly considered, and that's Anthony Weaver. The reason I didn't have him on my list is he only played 2 years in this era. Now, his 2 years were phenomenal. He had 108 tackles, 31 tackles for loss, and 15 sacks, and like 5 forced fumbles. So it's hard to keep him off my list, but half of his career wasn't in this time frame that we're looking at. So that's the reason Kyle Hamilton doesn't make the list. The reason he's on the list, he's one of the most talented players on the list. He was an All-American. He was an impactful player. He was the best, in my opinion, their best defensive player. With all due respect to Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, he was their best defensive player on the team that went undefeated. I think Kyle Hamilton was I think their best all-around player in 2020. Jeremiah was their most explosive and dynamic player. Kyle was the most consistent. And but again, that's the issue with Kyle. And it's also the reason why I don't have Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah on my list, because he really only played for 2 years. And so I had to decide, do I put Jeremiah on my list or Kyle on my list? And when it came down to it, I just think Kyle was the more consistently good player. We got 2.5 years of Kyle. We only got 2 years of Jeremiah in the lineup. There were some tough decisions to leave guys off. So when you're talking about for an entire career, when one guy did it for a lot longer, even if his best wasn't necessarily as good as this other guy's best, that's really what it boiled down to for me. So that's why Kyle's 10th on my list. It's also why Jeremiah is not on my list.
No, I think that's fair. I had a lot of the same internal debate with myself around Kyle Hamilton. You talk about, he's one of the most physically gifted safeties to come through Notre Dame. He's 6'4", and I think that's what a lot of people remember about him. Rightfully so. I get it. He was doing that at the time when it wasn't popular that teams had 6'4" safeties with that type of range and that type of athleticism. But the thing that kept him that low for me, he was in the start. He was an impactful rotational true freshman. He was a freshman All-American in 2019. the postseason accolades. He was a finalist for the Chuck Bednarik Award and a semifinalist for the Thorpe Award in 21. To your point, I think a lot of that was making up for the lack of attention that he received in 2020, because I don't really know how you can evaluate and compare his 6 games to a different player in 21 who played 12 games. I think that's just very difficult to project that level of impact over missing half a season. But I had a lot of that too. I put Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah in mind just because he's one of the most decorated linebackers that's come through Notre Dame since 2000.
Trev, if I didn't have the 2 kids that were outside of your era, if I didn't have Shane Walton and Courtney Watson, Jeremiah is the first guy that goes on my list.
100%, man. I mean, and I get the struggle with that. I mean, he was the Buckus Award winner in 2020. He was a unanimous All-American in 2020. He was the ACC Defensive Player of the Year in 2020, the one year that they were in the conference.
And it wasn't close. It wasn't close from a statistical standpoint. As I've said, I think Kyle was their most consistently good player, but Jeremiah's numbers, and you think about what the big plays he made in the game against Clemson, just ripping the ball out of ETN's hands and taking it to the house. You think of the third down breakup that set Notre Dame up for a field goal. Man, it was hard to keep him off my list. But it came down to the longevity. He played for 2 years at Notre Dame.
And to your point, that's what kept him at number 8 on my list. If you just talk about postseason accolades and total stat, I mean, he had 142 tackles, 24 and a half tackles for loss, 7 sacks and an interception, and a fumble return for a touchdown in 2 years. But it's that 2 years that also keeps him at number 8 and why he's not inching up closer. Because if you just looked at the accolades, you're like, how is this guy not a top 5 player since 2000? Longevity reasons. I'm with you.
So Abby Amiri is tied for 10. I had a tough time not having him higher as well. But here's what it came down to for me, because it was like Foskey versus Abby Amiri was a debate for me for a second. But here's what it came down to. Victor is a very underrated player at Notre Dame. And I think it's because he played on the same team that Brady Quinn played. So when he has back-to-back years of 15 tackles for loss, he has 18 and a half sacks over a 2-year period of time. It was a very good 3 forced fumbles in 2 years during that stretch. Also played as a freshman, had 4 tackles for loss as a freshman, 6 as a sophomore. Finished his career at Notre Dame 5th all-time in tackles for loss. He finished his career 8th all-time with the 8th best single-season sack mark. He finished his career 5th all-time in sacks with 21 and a half. The reason he's a little bit lower is because he was always a real good, steady player, but I never felt like he was a dominant player. I don't know that there was any stretches of dominance, where with Foskey, there were some stretches of dominance. And then he was even more productive. But there's no way I could leave Victor Abiamiri off this list just because he was such a steady player for Notre Dame. And he was, in my opinion, with all due respect to Tom Zbikowski, he was the best defensive player on those 05 and 06 teams. And was a really, really good football player for Notre Dame. So that's why he made my list. Even though he doesn't have like the All-American honors that Jeremiah has and that other guys that are off this list have, he just was steady for 4 years and was a big-time recruit. And, just his last 2 years in Notre Dame were outstanding.
Yeah, that's why he's on my list, but not much higher, because comparing him to the other defensive linemen even that I have on this list, he doesn't have some of the postseason accolades. But one of the things that we talked about on the offensive side that's still true for the defensive side is, what is your impact on the program? Mm-hmm. Victor Abiamiri goes very unsung in the conversation around, he was also part of the revival of Notre Dame football. Mm-hmm. To your point, a lot of the attention went to Brady Quinn and Jeff Samardzija. I get it. I'm not like Victor Abiamiri should be talked about in the same light as Brady Quinn. I get why he wasn't. But when you have a player that productive on your defensive line in 05 and 06, he absolutely should be on this list. I'm with you completely.
Yep. Just some other guys from the list, Trev, that we went through. I had Isaiah Foskey 9. Again, it was tough to not have him 9. Part of it was I thought he was very productive and he had moments of dominance, but he was never like the elite player that some of the other guys on this list are going to be. But Isaiah Foskey had a very underrated career because we don't talk a lot about him anymore as a fan base. This is a guy that had the 5th best all-time single-season sack mark, and he did it twice with 11 sacks. His 7 forced fumbles is tied for first all-time, and he is the official number 1 all-time sack player on Notre Dame's schedule. Now, I don't know how to pronounce Allen's last name, but one of the guys that's in charge of stats at Notre Dame Allen, did a great job of. He actually went back and counted sacks for Ross Browner in his career, and but it's he counted it, but sacks were not an official statistic back then, so he couldn't so Foskey's still the official all-time leader in sacks at Notre Dame, but he went back with 26.5, but he went back and counted. Ross Browner had 14.5 in the first season, and I don't know that he counted his whole career because there's some games, but oh yeah, he did. Ross Browner in 73, 75, 76, and 77 had 43 sacks.
Okay.
He was a dog, but that was also in the 70s. Since then, Isaiah broke Justin Tuck's record with 26.5. So he belongs on this list. Was a second team All-American in 2022 and had a very nice career. Was good on special teams, had multiple block punts. I mean, I think he scored a touchdown on a punt recovery. He had a very, very good career. And I think it's the longevity of Isaiah Foskey. And then also compared to Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, he never had one season as good as Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah's 2020 season. But he had 2 seasons that were very good.
Right.
He owns multiple Notre Dame records or is tied for multiple Notre Dame records at Notre Dame, something Jeremiah Owusu did not. Because with Isaiah Foskey, he's a guy that played multiple years. He, more than just the 2 years. He made an impact for 4 years at Notre Dame. So that's why I have Isaiah on this list.
I get it. He's on my list at number 7 overall for a lot of the reasons that you listed off. Again, talking about program impact, I think he's also one of the star players that kind of helped propel Marcus Freeman's tenure forward. What would we think about Marcus Freeman-led teams if it wasn't for Isaiah Foskey breaking the sack record in his first year as the head coach? It was the same reason why I put Michael Mayer on my list, my top 10 list for the offenses. Like, he was one of those star players that kind of helped jumpstart Marcus Freeman's tenure at Notre Dame. But yeah, I agree with everything that you said about Foskey.
I did have Shane Walton on my list. As we talked about, Trevor, I had him number 8 on my list. Shane Walton was not just really good in 2022 or 2002 when he was a unanimous All-American, had 7 interceptions, a mark that I think is tied for first all time. No, it's tied for, let me see, because Harrison had that. It's tied for, it's not first because there was somebody that had more. It was tied for 4th. Let's see, Xavier Watts. Let me find it here. Well, I can't find it, but it was one of the top 5 best single season marks. But when you look at Shane Walton, he had 68 tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 7 interceptions, 7 breakups, and a forced fumble in his All-American season. But the year before, he had 6.5 tackles for loss, 2 picks, 6 breakups. And then in 2000, he had 40 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 2 interceptions, 1 breakup. He was a very good player for a long time and was part of a defense that kind of had a bit of it was a short-lived turnaround, but the defense is what fueled that 2002 season. And him and Courtney Watson, who's on my list in a little bit, were the driving forces behind that. And there were others. I love the safety tandem of Glenn Earl and Jerome Sapp. Obviously, you look at the defensive line, which had Cedric Hilliard and Darrell Campbell were really good. Like, there was a lot. Vontez Duff at corner on the other side. There was a lot about that defense I loved. But Shane Walton and Courtney Watson were the 2 guys that were the dominant players on that list. So you could debate whether or not, I think there's a debate of whether or not Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah could be on this list over him, but I think Shane Walton was an outstanding football player and a great story as well. Walk-on player, came to Notre Dame as a soccer player. Very cool story. The other guy that's in my top 6 or top 6 to 10 that you didn't talk about because you're talking about him later is Harrison Smith. And I was back and forth. My 7, 6, and 5 were very difficult to decide. The reason that I went with Julian Love over Harrison Smith is because Harrison had great overall production. He finished his career 11th all-time in tackles, first for a safety, but his first year and a half, he wasn't even playing safety. He finished his career with 10 breakups, which is 10th all-time. Or excuse me, his 10 breakups in 2011 was 10th all time. He had 28 career breakups, which is third all time. But he was never an All-American. He was never like the best player in the country at his position or even in the conversation for that. And his production, he was just really good for 3 years, especially the last two. So he's a top 5 talent, in my opinion. But when you're trying to separate big-time players, I think for Harrison, for me, it was the lack of postseason accolades compared to some other guys that was a bit of a separator. And that 1 year at linebacker was he put up numbers that is why he ranks where he ranks, but he wasn't a real good linebacker. The way that they used him, he was miscast. I think he's higher on my list if he would have played safety that year instead of that time at linebacker. He would have been much higher on my list. But his last 2 years at safety were really, really good. And he's number one on this list when you talk about what they are doing and what they did in the NFL. Now, Kyle might have a chance to maybe get there someday, but Harrison Smith, with all due respect to how good Kyle has been, was being in the conversation of best safety in college football or in the NFL very early in his career. And for like a decade was in the conversation of, is he the best safety in the NFL? There was always different guys in the debate with him, but he was always part of that debate. He was one of the constants. And that's why Harrison is on my list. But the reason Julian is ahead is, to me, Julian had way better postseason accolades. He was a unanimous All-American. Julian's 2 best years, I think, were better than Harrison's 2 best years from a production standpoint, impact on the team. Harrison didn't play on very good teams. That's, not necessarily his fault, but he was a great player on a couple 8-5 teams. Julian was a great player on a team that was part of taking a 4-8 team, and he was on as a freshman and helping turn it around, and he played a big role in that. And the other thing I love about Julian Love, Harrison had some of this on him too. I mean, he had the pick at the end of the USC game to clinch that, and he had some big plays in his career. Miami, he was the lights out in the bowl game. But Julian was a money player. I mean, just an absolute money player. And the king of pick sixes, man. So that's why Julian was number 7 on my list. So let's just quickly rehash again for a couple people joined late. But my 10 through 6, I had a tie at 10 with Victor Abamiri, Kyle Hamilton, Isaiah Foskey at 9, Shane Walton at 8, Harrison Smith at 7, Julian Love at 6. Trev was Victor Abamiri 10, or Kyle Hamilton 10, Victor Abamiri 9, Jeremiah Usukormo 8, Isaiah Foskey 7, Julian Love 6. Give me your 5 to 1, Trev. I'll give my 5 to 1, and then we'll talk about it.
Yeah, my 5 through 1 players, I have Harrison Smith at number 5. I have Justin Tuck at number 4, Jalen Smith at number 3, Xavier Watts at number 2, and then Manti Te'o number 1.
I have Courtney Watson number 5, and then 4 through 1, we have the exact same list. I have Justin Tuck at 4, Jalen Smith at 3, Xavier Watts at 2, and Manti Te'o at 1. So let's talk about this one, Trev. You have Harrison Smith in your top 5. It's a little higher than mine, and he's not lower than mine because I have 2 guys on there that you don't have. Only one of the guys on my list are from – if I was looking at the same era you had, I'd have him 6 behind Julian Love. Let's hear your argument for why Harrison Smith is top 5. I'm not going to push back on it. I just want to give you your chance to talk about Harrison. So I just got done talking about him.
Yeah, I don't have one. No,
okay then. All right. So Justin Tucker number 4. I was actually rolling dice, Brian, and just his number came up.
I flipped the coin. If I'm being real, no. I had a lot of very similar internal debate about Julian Love versus Harrison Smith because the postseason accolades for Julian Love far outweigh. So then I turned my attention to the overall program impact. The argument for Julian Love is like, okay, can you have more of an impact? You want to see what his impact was? Go look at the 2018 Clemson game when he was injured and for a little bit of time, and then what happened in that game. Totally understandable. To me, when I look at Harrison Smith's lasting legacy at Notre Dame, I think that he started a run of attracting really good safeties to Notre Dame. Whereas Julian Love was amongst the good corners that started to come to Notre Dame. But I don't know if he was like necessarily the benchmark guy. But I think Harrison Smith was.
Mm-hmm.
Because before Julian Love, there was a Kavari Russell. He didn't pan out, but there was the Darren Walls. But before Harrison Smith, it was like, Zibby was great. Chinedum Ndukwe was great. But I don't know how they were relative, like coming out of high school. But, there are some, again, safeties didn't work out. But Max Redfield was a highly attractive recruit coming out of high school. It's players like that that continue to stack and stack. And so that was my separator. But I think Julian Love's best season compared to Harrison Smith's best season, the advantage goes to Julian Love. I'm with you there. I
think
thought
his
it was just
second best season also. Here's my only pushback on that, Trev, is that Harrison Smith, you are right, played a big role in why safeties came to Notre Dame. The only pushback I would say, but it wasn't because of what he did at Notre Dame.
That's fair.
It's because of what he did for the Vikings. I think that's and the fact that he was, he talked about Notre Dame and all that, but it's a fair debate. I think to me, I don't want to push back on Harrison Smith because I think Harrison Smith is a dog.
No, I get it.
My number 5 was Courtney Watson. This is the one difference that we had. Courtney Watson was not eligible for your list for the reasons that you talked about. Courtney Watson is another one of those extremely underrated players, all-time players in Notre Dame. I mean, you look at him, 294 tackles, is 16th all-time at Notre Dame in his career. 36 tackles for loss, is 9th all-time in his career. He had 3 straight years of over 75 tackles, finished his career off. His last 2 years had 207 tackles in his last 2 years. He had 3 straight years of double-digit tackles for loss. When you talk about how good Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah was, Courtney Watson was that good, and he did it a third time. Like that was the thing, is like, as a sophomore, he had 76 tackles, 10 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, a pick, 2 breakups. As a junior, he had 90 tackles, 10 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, 4 interceptions, 4 breakups. And then as a senior in 03, he had 117 tackles, 15 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks, 2 interceptions, and 3 breakups. Finished his career 294 tackles, 36 tackles for loss, 8.5 sacks, 7 picks, 9 breakups in his career. Like, that's all around dominance. And then went on to be a second-round NFL draft pick of the New Orleans Saints. Courtney Watson does not get talked about enough. When we have conversations about the best linebackers at Notre Dame and Manti and Jalen Smith and Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah and you talk about all these guys, 2 of our favorite underrated players, Corey Mays and Brandon Hoyt, Drew Tranquil, Tavon Coney. There's a lot of guys they talk about. Not enough people talk about Courtney Watson. I think there's 2 reasons why. I think there's a lot of younger fans like you who just don't remember Courtney Watson. You were 5 when he was part of that 02 team. You were 6 when he was having his best season of his career. I get that. I also think for other fans, maybe that was part of a tenure when Notre Dame as a team just was very disappointing. They only had 1 good year in his career. He was a big part of the reason they were that good that 1 year, though. I mean, he was a great player. But he was great for 3 years. And that's something that's a bit of a separator for me. Very, very underrated player. Clutch player, really good pass rusher, great run defender, great pass defender, as evidenced by his 7 interceptions and 9 pass breakups as a linebacker. So that's why Courtney Watson's on my list. So we'll just kind of go 4-1, Trev, and we'll just get our shot to talk about the next 4. I'll talk Justin Tuck real quick, and then you can tell why he's on your list, and then I'll let you kind of get to the next group, since this is the one exception to the rule for Trevor, because this was before his time, but some guys are just so good that you can't leave them off the list. I mean, here's the accolades for Justin Tuck. His 19 tackle for loss season in 03 is the 2nd best all time. His 43 career tackles for loss is 3rd best all time. His 13.5 sacks from 03 is the official number 1 ranking. Obviously, we talked earlier, Ross Browner has the unofficial number 1, but that was only 14.5. Justin's 13.5 was outstanding. And his 25.5 sacks is 2nd all time. When he left college, he was number 1, and he left with a year of eligibility left. If he would have played as many games as Victor Abiamiri, he's close to 40 sacks, in my opinion, if he doesn't get to 40 sacks. His one individual season was an absolute brilliant season. 73 tackles, 19 tackles for loss, 13.5 sacks, 2 breakups, and 3 forced fumbles. He was an absolute monster. He was not quite as dominant the next year. 47 tackles for loss, 14 tackles for loss, 6 sacks. And then as a redshirt freshman, had 44 tackles, 10 tackles for loss, and 5 sacks, 2 breakups, and a forced fumble. So even in 3 years in the lineup, he had double-digit tackles for loss every season. Something Victor Abiamiri didn't do, something Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah didn't do, something that Isaiah Foskey didn't do, something that Stephon Tuitt didn't do. 3 straight years as a defensive end of 10-plus tackles for loss is outstanding, in my opinion. 3 seasons in a row of 5 sacks or more. Again, something that a lot of these other guys did not do. And then just the dominance. I mean, he just was a dominant player. My only regret is that he didn't get a chance to play on some better teams, but he had 10 tackles for loss on that 0-2 team with Courtney Watson. I think it was his redshirt freshman season. So he was part of that 0-2. He doesn't get talked about as much on that 0-2 team because you had Shane Walton was an All-American, Courtney Watson, you had Glenn Earl, Jerome Sapp, Big Said, Daryl Campbell. Like, you had some great players on that list. But Justin Tuck was part of it as a redshirt freshman. 40 tackles, as I mentioned. He had 44 tackles, 10 tackles for loss, and 5 sacks on that team. So he did play on one really good team. Just the next 2 years were disappointing, but it wasn't because of Justin Tuck. I can assure you of that. He was outstanding. He was an outstanding player.
Like Brian said, Justin Tuck is the exception to my rule because I said that I just don't have a memory of. And to be fair, if you ask me what was my favorite Justin Tuck game, I would not be able to tell you.
Mm-hmm.
But here's why he's on this list for me. Between the guys that have made a significant impact on defense from 2000 to 25 that I didn't get to watch, Justin Tuck is the only player where we still say, can this D-end be the next Justin Tuck? Can he have a Justin Tuck impact? Whereas, albeit the great seasons that the two other players had, I haven't heard, at least in my social circles, ask if Kari Adams can be the next Shane Walton.
Mm-hmm.
But I have heard, hey, can Rodney Dunham, since he's wearing number 44, be like Justin Tuck?
Mm-hmm.
Hey, can Drake Bowen be the guy that we're getting ready to talk about? Or can Kingston be the next JOK or things like that? So that's why Justin Tuck made this list, because his impact on the program left a lasting effect to where Brady Quinn did for the offensive side of the ball. Every quarterback that now comes through, it's, hey, can he be the next Brady Quinn?
Mm-hmm.
Can he have that similar impact? So it's short and sweet, but that's why he's number 4 on this list, because he has had that lasting impact. And now it's stood for over 22 years. He was on the team 22 years ago, and people are still talking about, can he be the next Justin Tuck?
Mm-hmm.
That's why he's number 4 for me on my list.
Then
number 3 on this list, Brian, this is when it starts to get pretty easy. It's Jalen Smith. I mean, you want to talk about a freaky physical specimen, one of the best to come through Notre Dame. I talked about with Kyle Hamilton, he's probably the best safety prospect to come through Notre Dame. You could argue that Jalen Smith is just one of the best overall defensive prospects to come through Notre Dame. I mean, you talk about the accolades, he had them. Jalen Smith won the Butkus Award in 2015. He was a consensus All-American. The biggest regret is the fact that he played on Brian Van Gorder's defenses.
Yeah.
And even with that happening, he was a consensus All-American and a Butkus Award winner. You want to talk about having success in spite of a coach? Jalen Smith in 2015 did that because his level of talent was such that he's just a difference maker. He is one of those players that when you were watching him live, he'll be on one of these lists very, very soon.
The disappointing thing about Jalen Smith is that he should be number 1 on this list. And there's nothing he did to keep himself from being number 1 on this list. 1 through 3 actually was not easy for me because I had a real tough time with him and Xavier Watts.
That's fair.
And because as an individual player, he's the most talented player I've ever seen. And he was impactful. Like, let's not act like, and you're not, I'm just saying, like, just in general, let's not act like Jalen Smith was just super talented, but never real productive because of whatever.
Sure.
And Jalen Smith had back-to-back years of over 60 solo tackles. He had back-to-back years of 112 or more tackles for loss. Tackles, goodness gracious. He had back-to-back years of 9 tackles for loss. 4.5, but he only had 4.5 sacks in his career. That's absurd that you didn't have Jalen Smith pressure the quarterback more. Like, that's the problem, is like, he should have been number 1, but I can't put him number 1 because I would have projected, well, what would he have done in Mike Elko's defense or Marcus Freeman's defense or Al Golden's defense or Clark Lee's defense or Bob Diaco's defense. Unfortunately, for his last 2 years, he played for Brian Van Gorder. So like, let's be real about that. But Jalen Smith was an outstanding player for 3 years, and I still don't feel great about having him number 3. And I'll explain why he's number 3 when I get to Xavier Watts. But Jalen Smith was a special player. He was 1 spot behind Courtney Watson in all-time tackles, and he only played 3 years. I'd mentioned earlier that Courtney Watson ranked 16th all-time in tackles. Drew Tranquill's 18th. Jalen Smith was 17th. Jalen played 3 years. Those other guys played 4 years. He was an outstanding player, but, he doesn't rank high in really any other categories because of the defense he played in. Like Courtney Watson ranks 9th all time at Notre Dame in tackles for loss. Jalen Smith should have been more than that. He never had double-digit tackles for loss. Courtney Watson did that 3 times. So you could make a case that Courtney Watson statistically should be ahead of Jalen Smith. But Jalen's brilliance was I love Courtney, but Jalen's brilliance was special. He was an impact player on a bad defense, and I'd argue that he didn't play on very good defenses. But could you imagine how bad they would have been if they didn't have Jalen Smith on them? You know what I mean? Like they're terrible. I mean, he was an eraser. He would do things you're like, dude, I'll never forget that play he made against Michigan was it 2014? Where they're running outside zone away from him, and he just sees it and just like a missile shoots through the line and makes a play behind the line. You're like, there's not Manti can't make that play. Jeremiah Usu-Koromoa can't make that play. Courtney Watson can't make that play. Drake Bowen can't make that play. Kingston can't make that play. Jaden Alsberg can't make that play. There's one dude that's played at Notre Dame that can make that play, and it was number 9, Jalen Smith. I mean, he was a great player, all-time great player. I hate how his career ended for him. I hate it for him. And I hate the fact that he got stuck playing for Brian Van Gorder for 2 years. If he would have played with a real defensive coordinator and a real head coach, he's number 1 on this list. And with all due respect to Manti, it's not close. He was that special of a talent. And it's amazing he produced the way he did in spite of that coach. It really is.
Number 2 on this list for us, Brian, you talked about him. It's Xavier Watts, the most decorated safety that's come through Notre Dame, definitely in my lifetime. I can't speak to too much what happened before, but I mean,
you've never had a Notre Dame safety win National Player of the Year honors and stuff like that. No,
yeah, man. I mean, you're the Bronco Nagurski Award winner and a unanimous All-American in 23, a consensus All-American in 24, which is still just ridiculous, by the way, when he was a better football player, but it is what it is. Played a major role in Notre Dame's 2024 historic run, and a lot of the similar impact that Jalen Smith had, Xavier Watts had.
Mm-hmm.
When you need something to happen, you knew zero was going to be somewhere around the football. When you needed a play, when you needed a change in momentum, when you needed to look to a leader in a defensive huddle, you knew that was going to be Xavier Watts. From a talent standpoint, like physical tools standpoint, Jalen Smith is miles ahead of what Xavier Watts was. But everything all encompassing on this list is what put Xavier Watts in front of Jalen Smith for me. And Xavier Watts got the benefit of playing for a significantly better defensive coordinator than what Jalen Smith did. I mean, that was what separated it for me, truthfully.
Yeah, he was a special talent, Trev. I mean, you talk about Xavier Watts and you look at, where he ranks in some of the all-time marks, and you look at kind of where he is. So like his 7 interceptions was tied for 6th all-time. His interception return yards in 2024 ranks 4th all-time at Notre Dame. He obviously tied. He had the 2nd longest return. He could have never had the longest return. If you actually look at his interception return, it was actually longer than Luther Bradley's, but back then they would count where you caught it. So you could have a 103-yard return, where now you can catch the ball 1 yard out of the end zone from being out of the end zone and return it. It's only going to be 100 yards, but like, and just you talk the clutch aspect of it. He was such a clutch player in his career, just an absolutely brilliant clutch football player. He finished his career tied for 3rd all time in interceptions with 13. And he only really and they all came in 2 years because he was only a DB for 3 years, played 5 years in Notre Dame, but really was only truly a full-time DB for 2 years, 3 years, 2.5 years. But because remember, even in 2022, they had him playing both ways. Had him both playing both ways before they finally let him play defense. But think about that. To finish your career's 3rd best all-time in interceptions, and it all comes in 2 years. You talk about the postseason accolades. Jalen Smith won the Butkus Award as the best linebacker. Xavier Watts won the award for best defensive player in all of college football. Jalen Smith had a consensus All-American season in 2015, but in 2014, he was just a 2nd-team All-American. Xavier Smith was a unanimous All-American and then a consensus All-American. So the postseason accolades are there. Xavier was the heart and soul of a team that played for a national championship. Something that unfortunately, not because of him. These aren't shots at Jalen Smith. These are just realities of the teams the two players played on. You know, Xavier Watts Xavier was a captain. Jalen was a captain. So there's a lot of things they both have in common. Jalen Smith was the more talented player. Xavier Watts, in my opinion, was the more overall impactful player, in my opinion, and the more decorated player. And, you know, has more statistics where he ranks all time. And you can't say it's because he played 5 years, because all that production came in 2 seasons for Xavier Watts. And so I think for those reasons, like I said, all 13 interceptions came. He's Xavier in pass breakups. He ranks, let me see where he's at on pass breakups. He is in the, I think, 18th all time in pass breakups, I believe. Let me find that here. I think he's tied with Benjamin Morrison for 12th all time in pass breakups. Cam Hart's right behind him at 17. And like so 12th all time at 18 pass breakups. Trev, those came in, he had 4 in 2022. 14 of those came in the last 2 years of his career.
Good.
All 13 interceptions came in the last 2 years of his career. You know, so when you're talking about a guy that ranks where he ranks, and he did it all really in 2 years. You talk about the clutch plays. There's a lot we talk about. We don't talk enough about like the interception he had right before Jeremiah Love's 98-yard touchdown run.
Yeah.
Indiana's knocking on the door, getting ready to score, and he makes the great read, jumps behind the receiver, ball goes low, and he's right there to pick it off.
Mm-hmm.
You think at the time, I mean, I remember there was the play against Georgia. They ran a reverse and they had it called. You had 10 Notre Dame players going in the opposite direction of the ball carrier. There was one guy that read the play, and it was 0, and he makes the tackle at the line of scrimmage. That's the difference between a 0 gain and a touchdown in the Sugar Bowl is Xavier Watts. He was a special player. With all due respect to Justin Tuck and Courtney Watson, there's a gap for the top 3 and everybody else just because of how special they were and the fact that they did it on such good teams. Like, that's what it comes down to. Number 1 all-time, Trev, is Manti Te'o. And again, this is an easy one. You know, you talk about the most decorated, not just the most decorated linebacker in Notre Dame history. He's the most decorated linebacker, in my opinion, in the history of college football, with all due respect. I mean, when you talk about what Manti did, first of all, there's the statistics, right? You look at his career, finished his career 3rd all-time in tackles, 437. Finished his career with 34 tackles for loss in his career. You talk about consistent production, had 3 straight seasons of over 113 tackles. His lowest tackle season of his last 3 years was actually the 2012 season when he was the Heisman runner-up. He had 133 tackles as a sophomore, had 128 tackles as a junior, and had 113 tackles as a senior. His 34 tackles for loss ranks 4th all-time. I think he's in the top 3 or 4 amongst linebackers. He had 7 interceptions in his last year at Notre Dame as well. And then in his senior season, not only is he a captain in the heart and soul of a turnaround season for Notre Dame, you go play for the national championship, but he wins the Maxwell Award as the nation's best player. He wins the Walter Camp Award as the nation's best player. He wins the Lott Trophy for the best defensive player, Chuck Bednarik Award for the best defensive player, Bronco Nagurski Trophy, the Butkus Award as the Lombardi Award, and he's a unanimous All-American. Like, there's never been a more decorated player, in my opinion, in Notre Dame history than in my lifetime. When I say history, I'm talking about my lifetime. I don't know what. Actually, I should look that up for an interesting thing. You know, what was Ross Browner and guys like Bob Crable and some of those guys? You know, how were they in that regard? But when I look at Manti in our lifetime, in our era, there's nobody that was even remotely close to being as decorated as what Manti Te'o was. And the sad thing is because so many people are going to talk about what happened, what we come to learn after the fact, and it kind of overshadows what he meant to Notre Dame. He was the heart and soul of that football program. And you talked earlier about the impact that Harrison Smith had on safeties. Nobody's had a bigger impact on guys coming to play for Notre Dame at that position, in my opinion, than what Manti Te'o had. They're still getting kids because of Manti. Still getting
his impact Yeah, his impact on the program he's the most impactful guy on this list.
Mm-hmm.
And he's up in the discussion with Brady Quinn as far as impact on the overall program, especially since 2000. I'm with you. It's unfortunate the things that came to light after the season, but here's what people forget about. Like, he still lost his grandmother in that season and
Mm-hmm.
still performed the way that he did. Everybody just wants to talk about the girlfriend thing because that's what got the most clicks.
Right.
But let's not forget, he also lost a very crucial, matriarch of their family that year and still put on that type of performance. I've never seen a linebacker have that type of season at Notre Dame.
Yep.
7 interceptions. I mean, just
And they were clutch. You think of the diving interception against Oklahoma. You think of, being part of that 4th down stop against Stanford. You think about the deep interception he had against Michigan that year. I mean, there's a lot more. There's a lot more to it.
I mean, it plays into what makes Notre Dame so awesome? You have the mystique and the tradition of Notre Dame and the special stories. And especially during the time that it was happening, like, I put the Manti Te'o storyline of 2012 up there with the win one for the Gipper stuff, the chicken noodle soup game that Joe Montana played in. I think of the season that I talk about it in the likes of, Manti Te'o lost a family member during the season. You come home for a home game against Michigan and everybody has the lays going and it's under the lights and that's magical, bro.
Yep.
I mean, it was unlike anything.
And what does he do in that game? 8 tackles, a tackle for loss, 2 pass breakups, and 2 interceptions.
Yeah.
They haven't beaten Stanford in forever. He has 11 tackles and makes that is part of the game-winning stop. You talk about going on the road and beating Oklahoma, top 5 game, top 5 opponent. What does Manti do? 11 tackles in the game, 2 tackles for loss and an interception and a pass breakup in that game. I mean, he was a brilliant player. He really was. He was it was a magical season. But I mean, I'm looking at this right here, Trev, and you're looking at some of the numbers that Manti had in his career. I mean, sophomore year against Stanford, he has 21 tackles in the game.
That's so dumb.
Like as a sophomore.
That's
crazy. It was just bonkers. The week before that, against Michigan State, that game they lost. If you remember that, the Little Giants play. But Manti was so good, that 11 tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss in that game. I mean, he was brilliant, man. He was a special player, and guy that loved Notre Dame too. Like, that's the other thing. He still comes back. He still talks to the team. He still does all those things. Yeah, he was a special talent. I did look up Ross Browner's accolades. And Ross Browner, I don't know that he's quite where Manti was, but he actually was a defensive player that did win some national honors. He won the Maxwell Award, top player, Lombardi Award, top defensive player, Outland Award, and he was a 2-time unanimous All-American, 2-time UPI lineman of the year. So if anybody was close, it was Ross Browner. He was one that was close, but and if you've talked to Lou Samoji, I mean, which I have, he says that he's the best defensive player he's ever seen in Notre Dame. And Lou was around for Manti. That's how good Ross Browner was. So, but he's not someone that I watched play. He was finished his Notre Dame career a year before I was born. But in my lifetime, there's been nobody like Manti. Just production, heart, and what he meant to the team, and honors and all that stuff. It was a fun year to be a fan. And I was just a fan that year, Trev. I was coaching that year, so I was just a fan. And being able to watch Manti, and it was pretty awesome. Pretty awesome. So he's number 1 on the list.
We did have a couple of honorable mention guys because, again, this is a very, very steep list. I'll rattle off mine here real quick. A couple of my honorable mention players. One of them we mentioned already was Corey Mays, linebacker in 2005. Grossly underrated linebacker. And the linebacker play in 2006 took a step back after he and Brandon Hoyt left. Another player on my honorable mention is Stephon Tuitt. Manti was the best defensive player on the 2012 team, bar none, no debate. I think a strong case for second is Stephon Tuitt. I mean, he was absolutely exceptional that year. He was great in 2013 when he came back. And then last player on this list for me is Benjamin Morrison. I could not rank him in my top 10 because of some of his injuries. But, dude, in 2023, he was absolutely special, did not wait long to burst onto the scene in 2022, freshman All-American. I mean, he was being coined as like very similar to Leonard Moore. He's going to be the top cornerback prospect in this draft class whenever he goes. So Ben Morrison is on my honorable mentions.
Stephon Tuitt was an interesting one, Trev, because had he not dealt with that hernia issue and surgery that offseason, and he just wasn't in the same shape because of that, I think his 2013 season would have been even better, and he's probably up on this list. But he had one great season at Notre Dame. That was it. That's why he couldn't be on the list. But his one great season was pretty great. I would argue that if we're talking about most outstanding player, he was number 2 to Manti. If we're talking most valuable, he would be number 3. Number 2 would be Louis Nix.
Yeah.
Always loved Louis as a player. Anthony Weaver was an honorable mention one for me. As I said, if I can include all 4 of Anthony Weaver's seasons, he's in the top 10. Like he would have been, but I just said, hey, I'm not going to include 1999 and 1998. Like when I did that with Julius Jones, so I took away 1999, but he was still, he was still would have, an honorable mention guy for what he did after that. Same thing with Anthony Weaver. You mentioned that Benjamin Morrison's in the conversation. There's a lot of other guys that you think about over the years. Tom Zbikowski is a guy that I thought about, just kind of thinking back over the years, just some of the, Kavari Russell, how good he was at Notre Dame is a guy that was kind of on the list. The 2 safeties from 02, that 02 period, Glenn Earl and Jerome Sapp were 2 of my favorites from the 2000 era. You think about that 05-06 team, they had a couple D tackles that I consider. Trevor Laws had a year where he had over 100 tackles as a D tackle. I mean, he had an outstanding season. Yeah, Derek Landry was a really good player back then. Corey Mays was a really good football player at Notre Dame. Just not good enough to be on this list. But Drew Tranquil was a guy that I considered for a minute, but he just didn't have the overall production that you'd want. But, man, he was real good his last 2 years. What you want to be on the top 10. I mean, I loved it for his career. This is just more of, in order to get into the top 10, he would have needed more of that. But there's been some really good Notre Dame defensive players over the years. Sheldon Day had a really good career at Notre Dame. He had a brilliant final season at Notre Dame. He had the same problem that Jalen Smith had, is his last 2 years were playing for Brian Van Gorder, which is a bit of a problem for him. But those would be some of the guys that I considered. Cam Hart is a guy that I considered for a bit as well. Let's wrap up with this, Trev. Let's talk about the current team and guys that we think might have a chance to crack this list when their career's over. I think there's one that's obvious. And if we included current players, he'd be probably in my top 10. He'd be in my top 10.
Yeah, Leonard Moore, if we included current players, would be in my top 10. He's the best cornerback right now that I've seen at Notre Dame, and that includes some great play from other players. Notre Dame is not a favorite on FanDuel to win the national title just because of one guy, but Leonard Moore is definitely a big reason why they're one of them. I could see him and I'm going to leave out like true freshmen from this conversation because it's just so hard to project what they're going to do over the next 3 to 4 years. But of players that we've seen, I would go Leonard Moore for sure. Depending on what Kingston's health is like because of his physical abilities, he might have an opportunity to crack this list. Boubacar is tough. I love Boubacar Traore. But if I were to stack him up against some of the other defensive linemen that are on this list, I think he would have to come back for 2027. Like to be able to stack up some of the accolades
or have like a Justin Tuck type of season this year. And that gets him in the bottom of the top 10. That might be enough to push out Foskey or Abby Amiri or Kyle Hamilton if he has like a 19 tackle for loss, 13 and a half sack, 14 sack season for a team that, competes for the title. It would take something like that. But the problem with that is it's going to be like what we talked about Jeremiah Usu-Kormo. Did it for 2 years where some of these other guys did it for 3 and 4. So if he's going to do it in only 2 years, then it's got to be a really super special second year. Or like you mentioned, Trev, come back for a third year. But the flip side of that is the reason I don't have Boubacar on my list is if Boubacar comes back in 2027, it's likely he doesn't have a real big year in 2026. So that would kind of hurt him a little bit. But Go ahead.
Only other player off the top of my head as well is Tay Johnson. If he can repeat and stay healthy what he did in 2025, I think he might have a shot. He'd be in the discussion for me as well.
There is you mentioned Kingston. I think if Kingston stays 2 more years, he could have that type of season. Assuming he comes back healthy this year. A couple other guys that I would consider, and I know this isn't going to be popular with some, but a guy that has a chance, it's unlikely, but has a chance would be, to me, Drake Bowen. Because you're talking about a guy that's a 3-year starter, a 2-time captain, has a chance to be a guy that starts 2 years on 2 different seasons on a team that maybe plays for the championship. Like that's possible for that to happen. If he has, let's say he has a 90 tackle season, he's going to finish his career in the top 30 all time in tackles at Notre Dame. If he has a 100 tackle career, he'll finish his career in the top 25 all time in tackles in an era, and he would be top 15-ish for linebackers. And you talk about what he means to the team. He'd be a guy that if he has a big final season, it's not like he can't repeat the last couple years, which have been pretty good. I'm talking like he has that big jump, that big final season. He'd have an outside shot of it, win some All-American honors, things like that. He'd need the postseason accolades. He'd be a guy that I would consider. You had mentioned Kingston. Some of the other ones are guys that are really young. Tay Johnson is one. I think you mentioned Tay, right? He'd be one. But could he be that guy with just 2 seasons? Or is he signing? How good would he have to be in the second season to be on the level of Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah, who I didn't have in my top 10 and you barely had in your top 10? You know what I mean? So
right,
it'd have to be one heck of a final season. So those are some guys that, depending on how their seasons go, but what if Tay comes back in 2027? Then now we're having a different conversation. But just 2 years of brilliance, which is also why I think Adon deserves a mention as maybe. If he has a Xavier Watts type of final season, he's going to have 3 years of very good play under his belt. So those are the guys that I get there. And then, honestly, there's some younger guys that aren't in the conversation now because we're not including freshmen, but the freshman class is so good that I'd be a little surprised if at least one guy from that group is not in this conversation when his career is over. That's a lot to put on him, and I'm not going to say who, but there's several guys that have that potential. Let's just see them pan out, but I don't want to throw them in there because that's an unfair thing to put on a kid who's never played a snap of Notre Dame football in a real game. But it is kind of what's excites you. Let's say Bryce Young has back-to-back great years. Could he be in the conversation in the same way as Isaiah Foskey was? Yeah, he could. That's another one. Like Bryce, I could see Bryce going out there having 10 sacks this year and not declaring for the NFL draft because it's a great edge class. And then coming back next year and having a similar season and then saying, hey, ultimately his first 2 years were still better than Foskey's. And so I do think Bryce is one that could, if he breaks out this year and still comes back. The problem, Trev, is if he breaks out this year, does he stay for 2027 and have that second season? Because, if he has 14 tackles for loss and 11 sacks this year, that's a heck of a year, right? But that's what Isaiah Foskey did as a junior. The difference is Isaiah Foskey came back the next year and repeated that. So that's kind of where it's at. Yeah. So he'd be one. None of the D tackles that are veterans, I don't think are in the conversation. Even the transfers, like I don't see them. They're not in a system that's going to let them put up the kind of numbers to have like a Trevor. If Trevor Laws can't make it into this top 10, Jerry Tillery doesn't make it into this top 10, Sheldon Day doesn't make it, I don't know that any of these D tackles are going to be in this conversation.
Yeah.
So that'll be tough. That'll be tough. But that was fun. That was fun, Trev. I enjoyed that. Here's what I want you guys to do on the board, though. I'm going to have Trev, when we're done, I want you to put your top 10, and I want you to put my top 10 on the board. And I want you guys to go on the board. If you're board members, I'd like to put some thought into it if you want, and give us your top 10 from 2000 to 2025 with the criteria we talked about. I think it'd be fun to see what you guys think about that.
It's Midweek Rundown here on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, and we're rolling. Just got done ranking the top 10 best defensive players at Notre Dame the last 25 years. Just got done ranking Notre Dame's top offenses that they're going to face this upcoming season. Now it's time to actually revisit one of those teams that we talked about, the Michigan State Spartans, Brian. And this is a team that Notre Dame, it's their third regular season opponent this year. They have a new head coach. They have a new look roster, made great acquisitions as far as the transfer portal goes and coaching hires. This is a rivalry renewed. Very excited for this one to come back on Notre Dame's schedule.
It's going to be a night game, which I'm excited about. Notre Dame has some night game payback they've got to give Michigan State. A lot of people forget that the last time these teams played in Notre Dame Stadium, it's actually a W for Michigan State in a year where Notre Dame stunk at 4-8, and Michigan State stunk even more. They were 3-9 that year, but beat Notre Dame. And obviously both teams kind of rallied the next season and the next couple seasons. But you know my stance on this one, Trev. People have asked me, I want Michigan back. And I'm like, well, you're halfway there. Just throw the state in there, and then we are on the same page as the team that we want back. This is a rivalry that means more to me. You know, not historically, obviously Michigan State was a team that was supportive of Notre Dame's desire to get into the Western Conference and then the Big Ten, which is what the Big Ten was previously known as, the Western Conference. I think that there are a lot of years where there's blue collar games. Everybody talks about the great games between Notre Dame and Michigan. Those were more recent, but one of the greatest games of all time, one of the first games of the century, was Notre Dame Michigan State in 1966. Number one versus number two. Michigan State was number two. Notre Dame was number one. They go on the road. Notre Dame ties them 10-10. Notre Dame wins the championship in a disputed year where people say, oh, Michigan State should have won the championship, all those other type of things. But, man, I tell you, there's been some great games between these two teams as well. You know, somebody asked me a couple weeks ago on a mailbag, what were your favorite Arnaz battle plays? And I couldn't remember any. And a buddy texted me, and as soon as he said it, I was like, oh, how did I forget that play? The slant route he caught at midfield from Pat Dillingham against Michigan State in, what was it, 03? What year was that, Trev, with Dillingham? It was 03? 02. I think it was 02. And, you know, outruns the Michigan State defense, you know, for a touchdown. And, you know, there have been some great games between Notre Dame and Michigan State over the years. The Little Giants play from 2010, you know, that we think about. Notre Dame beating Michigan State in 2013, and that Michigan State team goes 13-1, and their only loss is to Notre Dame, which is why I still think Pat Narduzzi hates Notre Dame, because he was the D coordinator on the team. He hasn't gotten over that yet. So there's been some great games between these two teams as well. They don't get the national notoriety as Notre Dame, Michigan, and there hasn't been as many recently of the top 5 games, but there have been some great all-time games between Notre Dame and Michigan State. And I honestly wish this was a rivalry that was brought back on a permanent basis. It's not. I think it's a 2-year deal, I believe, Trev. But this is a rivalry that I wish would come back more permanently. And, you know, I won't spend too much time talking about that I wish it would happen. I'm just going to enjoy the fact that it is.
One big reason why it could end up coming back is maybe they get revitalized under Pat Fitzgerald. That's the biggest thing for Michigan State this year. It's the start of the Pat Fitzgerald era, and leading up to it, it hasn't been great. I mean, look, Michigan State since 2021 has a combined record of 18-30. Mm-hmm. You know, their last winning season was in 2021 under Mel Tucker when they went 11-2, and Kenneth Walker was their running back.
Say that number again. From when to when their record is what?
From 2022 to through 2025, they're 18-30.
So if you add 2021, that would make them 29-32, correct? Mm-hmm. And 11 of those wins came in one season. That's disappointing, to say the least. Yeah. And I'll be honest with you, Trev, I thought they were going to be okay under Jonathan Smith. I liked him as a coach. I just think it was a terrible fit. That's why I keep saying, y'all, just because a guy doesn't win somewhere doesn't mean he's not a good coach. It just means he wasn't a good fit at that place. But, yeah, 18-30 in 3 years, Trev, is not getting it done, to say the least.
No, it's definitely not. And one of the reasons why they decided to move on from Jonathan Smith is they went 5-7 in 2024 and were worse in 25 I mean, they went 1-8 in conference last season. They went 4-8. Enter the Pat Fitzgerald era. He's now up in East Lansing, coming over from Northwestern. There's a lot of thought with some of the coaching hires that he made and the portal acquisitions that he made and some of the players that he retained from Michigan State's team last year. I don't think that this is going to be one, hopefully, that Spartans fans have to wait for 4 years for the rebuild to finally be done.
Yeah, there's no need to wait that long for a rebuild anymore, Trev. I mean, look, go out there, go back to what made Mark D'Antonio successful. Recruit the heck out of your state and recruit the heck out of Ohio and Pennsylvania. Find those 3-star kids that get overlooked and passed up by the Notre Dames and the Ohio States and the Michigans. Find those kids. Beat them for the occasional kid. Be willing to go down to Florida and find some of those 3-star sleepers. You know, they had some of those guys, Trev, that were, really very good football players coming out of high school, and but they were just overlooked. I mean, you talk about Darquez Denard, right? Who was a heck of a football player for them. He was a kid that was a 3-star ranked recruit. He was the number 1,450 player in the country out of Georgia, Jeffersonville, Georgia. Find those guys. Be great at evaluating. Find the sleepers, and then be great at development. But now you have the portal you can also go to and get those guys. Unfortunately, Michigan State's dealing with a lot of turmoil and controversy at the administration level outside of athletics. They've lost their president and their AD in the last month. There's issues with this rogue board member. There's just a lot going on that I think is holding them back now. But if they can figure that stuff out, I do think Michigan State is a team that can be in the top 5 to 6 of the Big Ten on a consistent basis. Are they ever going to have the upside of an Ohio State and Oregon? No. Or even if Penn State's run the right way, maybe not. If Michigan's run the right way, no. They've never been that consistently over time. But they can absolutely become a force. And then when they've got that good veteran team, then they do then compete for the Big Ten championship. We remember them having success early on, and you think, well, the Big Ten wasn't strong. Michigan was. They beat Urban Meyer multiple times. I mean, they knocked Ohio State out of the 2015 playoffs.
Yep.
By beating them in Columbus late in the year. Beat Ohio State by 10. A Braxton Miller-led Ohio State team, I believe, by 4 or 10. I forget. Can't remember if it was 24-14 or 24-20 in the Big Ten title game. 34-24. What? Hold on a second. What? Was that the 2013 season? Right? That was the year that
Braxton Miller was quarterback, I believe so.
So I'm trying to remember what year it was. Yeah, it was 2013. It was 34-24. Yeah, it was 2013. That was the year that Notre Dame is the only team that beat them. They beat number 21 Michigan 29-6, and then they played number 2 Ohio State. They were ranked number 10. They played, first of all, it was ridiculous. A team that was 11-1 was ranked 10th. And it's because they're Michigan State, not Michigan. Their only loss was to Notre Dame. And then they go out and beat number 2 Ohio State by 10 in the Big Ten title game, and they just jump up to 4th. And then they went and beat a really good Stanford team in the Rose Bowl. You can have those years at Michigan State. They're just not going to happen as consistently as they happen at Ohio State and Oregon and places like that. You got to have the right coach. That's the thing we've learned over the years at Michigan State. It's got to be the right coach. Duffy Daugherty was the right coach. To a degree, George Perlis was the right coach. Mark D'Antonio was the right coach. John L. Smith was not. You know what I mean? And it came to find out Mel Tucker wasn't. Jonathan Smith wasn't. But I mean, look, you had John L. Smith, and I should have done like John L. Smith and Jonathan Smith. This just was doomed from the start. I didn't even think about that, But nothing like watching John L. Smith run down the sidelines against Notre Dame with that "what just happened" look on his face. Did you ever see that? Favorite Michigan State memory. But we talk about the great comeback in 2006. We forget that Notre Dame had to have a great comeback to send the game into overtime in 2005 against Michigan State and ended up losing in overtime. So again, there's been some great games from these two teams, but the thing that's exciting about the future of Michigan State, if you can get the off the field stuff that has nothing to do with your football program figured out, I think Pat Fitzgerald has exactly the kind of personality that's worked here. He knows how to find those under the radar blue collar kids. He's a good evaluator. He hires good coaches, and he believes in a style that fits at Michigan State. And I think that's why there's some optimism, in my opinion, at Michigan State. Maybe it's not immediate. They're immediately a Big Ten contender, but if he's willing to stick it out and stay there for a while, I think he could win there.
Without a doubt. Let's take a look at what some of their odds are to win this season. I know we're getting ready to dive into their schedule. I went and took a look on FanDuel, and their over-under for wins right now, their over-under win total, is 4.5 wins, which I think is something that could be attainable with this schedule. I really do.
It does, Trevor. Let's pull up that schedule and look at it. You only play 3 teams. This is what I hate about the Big Ten having 18 teams. It disgusts me that in a 9-game conference schedule, Michigan State only plays 3 teams that it played the previous year in your league. I hate that. This right here, this graph shows exactly why these 18-team leagues, you can miss me with all the talk about how tough it is in our league because you don't play the same teams every year. It's not good for the sport. It's not good for this league or whatever. But anyway, it's a different conversation for a different day. You look at their schedule. You obviously start off with 2 quality MAC teams. Now, Eastern Michigan was down last year, but Chris Creighton has had some very good seasons at Eastern Michigan. Toledo's a very good team, although Jason Candle's not there anymore. Let's kind of see what happens with Toledo there. But even if you think they're quality football teams, Trev, they're teams that Michigan State should beat. So you should be able to go into the season 2-0. Start the season. So that's obviously something that you think should kind of be there, Trev. Now they've got to kind of go out there and handle it. But, with the way they played last year, maybe that's not a given. But I think with what we have seen from them, from Pat Fitzgerald and the talent they have coming back, I think that's, a reasonable win. You obviously play at Notre Dame. They play at Wisconsin. That'll be an interesting game at UCLA, at Michigan. That'll be a tough game at Rutgers. Those will be tough games at home. They've got a pretty good home slate. If you're a Michigan State fan, you get Illinois, Nebraska at home, Illinois at home, Northwestern at home, Washington at home, Oregon at home, all winnable games. Even last year's team, winnable games outside of maybe Oregon. That would be the one that would be like the big giant upset.
Yeah. So
you have a schedule that's like, hey, dude, if you really do a good job coaching here, you can get this team to a bowl game. I really think this is a schedule that's capable of getting this team to a bowl game, Trev.
Oh, I do too. I mean, you're going to have a lot of opportunity to move up. The one thing that stinks about this schedule is like you have not none of, but there's very few like OG Big Ten teams in here. Like Nebraska joined in like the late 2010s. Oregon, Washington, and UCLA all just joined the league. I mean, it's weird to see a Michigan State football schedule with no Ohio State on there. I mean, it is what it is at this point. But
no Ohio State, you've got Wisconsin, no Iowa.
Nope.
No Penn State, even though Penn State is even a team that joined in the 90s. It's like, what are the old school Big Ten teams? Illinois, Northwestern, and Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Rutgers just joined recently. Might as well just throw Maryland in there too. Give them the whole thing. I mean, this is a Big Ten schedule. To your point, Trev, this is a Big Ten schedule. Really? Like, no, it isn't. That's not a Big Ten schedule. No Purdue.
No, I mean, a couple of years ago, you could have argued this looks more like a Notre Dame schedule than a Big Ten schedule. You got Michigan on here, you got Wisconsin, but then you also have Oregon from the Pac-12.
Because you got 3 Pac-12 teams, right? You got some Big Ten teams. You got a Big 12 team in there. You got in Nebraska. You got you've got a Big East team there in Rutgers. You've got your MAC influence there. You're exactly right, Trevor. That's exactly what this looks like.
But to your point, the opportunity to pick up wins here is looking good. We'll see what Bob Chesney continues to do at UCLA. And we don't really have a long history of OG Big Ten teams being able to travel out west and have a lot of success. Right. And so that'll be a tough game for them. That'll be a litmus test. But Illinois at home is a winnable game. Northwestern at home, obviously you have the storylines there. They have their old coach and Pat Fitzgerald, and now Chip Kelly steps up there. So got some interesting ones in there, but I mean, I see at the minimum 4 to 5 wins on this schedule. Toledo, Eastern Michigan, Northwestern, Rutgers, and
and Trev, let's be real about something. We have seen, you just talked about Big Ten teams going out west and having a tough time. Well, a lot of those teams from out west have come east and had a tough time, including Oregon.
Yeah.
I mean, if Oregon can almost lose to Wisconsin 2 years ago, they can lose to Michigan State.
Sure.
I'm not predicting it. I'm just saying it can happen. Washington has struggled when they've had to go east in recent years as well. So, yeah, to your point, it's very manageable if your goal is to become a bowl team. Certainly manageable, and so we'll see if they're able to do it. But like you talk about Washington. I mean, they barely beat Maryland last year on the road. They lost to Michigan by 17 on the road. They lost on the road to Wisconsin. Their only other conference road game was to UCLA. That was obviously an out west game. In 2024, they lost at Rutgers, lost at Iowa, got blown out, lost at Indiana by 2 touchdowns, lost to Penn State by 28 touchdowns, and then lost at Oregon. Washington is still yet to go on the road and beat a traditional Big Ten team. Their only road win is over Maryland, who's not a traditional Big Ten team. So, again, that makes that game manageable. We've seen Oregon not exactly look like gangbusters coming out east and playing teams either.
Yeah, Washington under Jed Fish is starting to tread a little bit too close for my liking to NC State under Dave Dorn. A lot of talent, can't figure out how to win on the road, but that's a different story for a different day. Yeah. But for Michigan State, they absolutely have the opportunity to become a bowl-eligible team. The biggest thing that they're going to have to combat is, what they lost versus what they added, how many people are going to work out for them, because one of the reasons why you and I are higher on this team than maybe what some others are is for what they added in the portal and for what they have coming back to this team. Because there is talent there. There's people that just they do the clickbait stuff. It's like, Nick Marsh is gone, Michigan State's going to suck. It's like, well, the last I checked, you need 22 players on offense and defense, not just one guy. And what I like out of
with Nick Marsh, so what would be worse?
Right. I think they have the opportunity to pick up some wins this year. They have to overcome some important losses, and it's not all to the portal. I think it's interesting that Aiden Childs, their starting quarterback last year, went to Northwestern to be with Chip Kelly, and Michigan State now has Northwestern's former head coach and Pat Fitzgerald. That's an interesting dynamic. You lost Mekhi Frazier to Ole Miss. Nick Marsh transferred to Indiana, but then other wide receivers like Omar Kelly, he graduated. Jack Velling graduated. A couple of O-linemen graduated. But like we talked about when we were going through some of the top offenses that Notre Dame is going to face this year, because of their portal additions and what they return at some spots, this could be a pretty good offense.
It's got a chance. It definitely has a chance, Trev, and we'll see what Nick Sheridan can do as the offensive coordinator. You talked. I really like their running back. I've said this before. Let me pull up his numbers from last year. Cam Edwards, who's a transfer from UConn, he had 1,240 yards last year, 5.9 per carry, 15 touchdowns. The year before, as part of their a two-man backfield, he had 830 yards rushing, 5.7 per carry, and 8 touchdowns. In his career, you're talking about a kid, Trev, that's got almost 2,700 career rushing yards and 27 touchdowns. And it's not like he's transferring from Central Connecticut State, an FCS school. He's transferred from UConn, a team that won 9 games last year and had wins over Power 4 teams last year. Almost beat Syracuse, beat Duke. You're adding him, and that's a good football player. We've talked a lot about, our opinion of KK Smith and what he brings, the potential that he brings to the table. Nick Sharp is a transfer. Trent Fraley's a transfer. They're relying a lot on transfers to impact this team. And if they're as good as we hope they can be, and as good as I think Michigan State hopes they can be, you're talking about a team that has a chance to be impactful. They had just like Wisconsin, they had a sneaky good portal offseason.
Yep.
In what they brought in. Now, if they could have retained more of the players, maybe that would have been better. And I'm not even talking about Nick Marsh. I think that was probably best for them. But like Jalen Thompson, if they could have kept Jalen Thompson, if they could have kept, Jaden Mangum, that'd have been one that, there's just some of those guys you wish they could have kept. It was time for Aiden Childs to move on. It was, Nick Marsh needs to go. I think Nick Marsh was all about Nick Marsh kind of thing. But the kid that transferred to USC, the D tackle, you kind of wish he would have been able to come back. But
Alex Van Summeren.
Yeah. Sometimes, Trev, though, it's when your culture's broken, it's kind of sometimes better that more guys from that culture are gone, even ones that weren't necessarily bad parts of the culture. They were just part of the entire aspect of it.
Clean slated.
Yeah, to a degree. More fresh faces, I think, is a good thing. And so I think there's a chance that this offense can be good, Trev, because of the portal impact. And then the other part too is Specifically, the offensive line, I think, has a chance to be pretty decent this year. Again, I'm projecting a little bit, but there's some things about this offensive line that I like. I talked about, speaking of the portal, I like some of their portal pickups. I really do. I've talked about this. I like the Nick Sharp pickup. I like the offensive line coach they hired. And the other thing too is their offensive line has some size to it. Now, not necessarily height in the case of Trent Fraley, because he's only 6'1".
Yeah.
Maybe, and that even might be a little bit generous, but he's over 300 pounds. He may only be 6'1", but he's 306 pounds. He's a short, sawed-off Western PA kid. He's got some size. The guy that's projected to be the left tackle for them, Ben Morosky, is 6'7", 340. Their left guard, Nick Sharp, is 6'2", 351. Their center is 6'1", 306. Their projected right guard, Luka Vinchik, is 6'5", 316. And their projected right tackle, Connor Moore, is 6'6", 311. They also got a transfer at right tackle that's going to compete, Robert Wright. He's 6'5", 294, but he's not projected, at least by our lads, to be in the starting lineup. That's a big offensive line. Well, what does Pat Fitzgerald want to do? He wants to run the football. At least I think he wants to run the football. The only hesitation that I have about this team, Trev, is that I am concerned that the offensive coordinator he hired is a protege of Kalen DeBoer. That's my concern. Because I look at it and I'm like, well, you brought in Nick Tabaka. He's been an offensive line coach on some pretty good running teams over the years. You bring in Pat Fitzgerald. I mean, Pat Fitzgerald is a guy who obviously is a believer in playing physical football and stuff like that. There's that aspect of it. But man, then I look at Nick Sheridan. I'm like, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he would do everything the exact same way.
Sure.
But I at least have to admit that it's a concern. That's the reality of it. And I hope that they don't mess up what they're doing. Like, you brought in a big time physical running back that can also make some big plays. You brought in a massive offensive line. Also, you can throw the ball all over the field. That would be dumb. Be balanced and be physical. And I think that's where I, have some hope. But if I'm wrong on Michigan State's offense, I think the first thing they're going to be wrong about is what they do. That Nick Sheridan decides, let's run the offense we ran unsuccessfully at Alabama because it worked at Washington in the Pac-12.
Yeah.
Mistake.
I have a concern around that as well. That, and then when you combine the fact that there are some unproven players in the portal that they're getting, that they're relying on, I'm very excited to see what KK Smith can do in that offense. But let's also not be naive to the fact that it's like he is yet to really break out. Now, I think Michigan State is the right level for him to go and break out. I don't know what that's going to look like.
Right.
It's kind of a mixed bag right now with their offense. I'm with you.
Right. I mean, KK flashed last year, but he had 8 catches, 123 yards. He caught a touchdown pass against NC State when that game was still in doubt. He had some good moments, but he caught 8 passes last year. You know what I mean? Like, that's the reality. He has 11 career catches in his career. But yeah, to your point, there is some projection there, and that's one of the concerns, Trev, is you like the talent they brought out of the portal, but then a lot of that talent doesn't have proven production. They got a portal kid named Charles Brantley from Miami. That's a talented player, but he didn't play a lot of Miami last year.
Right.
So that is some of the concerns. They brought in some defensive linemen that have some ability, but they didn't even produce at the schools they were at. That's a bit of a concern for me. The defensive line is a concern looking at Michigan State as well. These two things kind of go hand in hand. They brought in some guys that I think have a little something to them. Trev, I do. I mean, you got a kid from Oregon, defensive tackle transfer from Oregon, Ben Roberts, who's a big old joker, 6'3", 335. But he didn't play a whole lot at Oregon. Well, that doesn't mean he's not a good player because Oregon had a ridiculous depth on the defensive line last year. Maybe he's a good player, and he would have played just for about anybody else, but he was buried behind a deep offensive line, but he still played. He had 19 tackles, 2 tackles for loss and a sack the last couple of years. So, but you're banking on a guy that didn't play a whole lot at the school he came from to come be able to play for you. Is that going to work out? Well, Notre Dame's doing that at wide receiver. So just because a guy didn't produce doesn't mean he can't play. Otherwise, okay, then why does any Notre Dame fan talk about Milan Graham or Quincy Porter? So there's that aspect of it to it. So but the defensive line is a bit of a red flag for me for that reason. There's some talented kids, but they're just unproven. And I think the same thing is true in the secondary. I think the secondary is a little bit of both. I don't love their talent, and I don't love the necessarily all the proven production at this level in the secondary.
Yeah, I have questions about their secondary as well. Like, one of their only returning players from the secondary, I believe, is Nikai Martinez, who is kind of played all over for their secondary last year. But I mean, outside of that, they lost Malcolm Bell. They lost Aiden West, who transferred. They lost their nickel, Aid Willie, who transferred to North Carolina. Joshua
Jaden Mangum.
Yep, yeah. Jaden Mangum. And then other safeties that, like, Amarian Smith went to Toledo. Malik Spencer graduated. And it's unfortunate because I think one of the bright spots to this team is their linebacking core.
Mm-hmm.
And it could get overshadowed by the fact that their defensive line could struggle and their secondary could struggle. But I mean, I put Jordan Hall on my all opponent team. I'm
first
a
team,
big
correct?
fan of his. I think I had him on second team.
I actually think you had him on first.
It might have been first.
Yeah. And you look in I won't say anything because that's going to give away something else that we're working on that I've already almost gave away a couple other times. But, he's a very good football player. Played at IMG, 4-star recruit. You look at, Bryce West, getting him out of Ohio State from the portal. He didn't play at Ohio State. Is that because he can't play at that level, or is it because he was back behind Denzel Burke 2 years ago, Jermaine Matthews, Davis and Ignosin, Devin Sanchez? Like, okay, well, you can still be a good player like KK Smith and not actually have played because you were buried behind even better players, which is why they're starting at those schools, not backups at those schools. But I can't then say, 9 wins because of all these guys that never played anywhere else are all of a sudden going to come and, be dudes for this team.
Right.
That's where there's some projection, and that's where there's a little bit of concern. In my opinion, when we look at this Michigan State team. But I think there's three key factors that are going to determine how good Michigan State can be. And 2 of them we've already touched on. Is the portal class as good as we think it is? Which then in turn means are the lines as good as we think they can be? Because they kind of go hand in hand. The final piece, Trev, can the quarterback play? That is he what they saw late in the year, where as we talked about earlier in the show, he comes out, actually you could even go last 4 games of the year. In the last 4 games of the year that he started, he completed well over 60% of his passes, had a 300-yard performance, a 255-yard performance, and 292-yard performance, threw 7 touchdowns and had 2 picks in the last 4 games. And now they went 1-3, but 2 of those 3 losses were a 3-point loss to Minnesota, a 3-point loss to Iowa, and then a 10-point win over Maryland, in which he outdueled Malik Washington, who you all know I'm super high on. Is that who he is, and therefore will carry over to the season? Or is it what we've talked about before, no pressure on the backup quarterback with the season over, so you go out there and ball. But now that all the pressure's on you and all the eyes are on you, who you really are comes into play. That's what we don't know, and I think that might be the final ingredient that determines whether this team is battling to get that over-under 3.5. Did you say 3.5? Was it 3.5? 4.5. Are you battling to be at that 4.5 over-under, or worse? Or are you a team you're in November, you're bowl eligible when November kicks off, and now it's just like, how good are we? I think that's going to be a big part of that. If he's as good as I think they hope he is, and as good as he looked in the last 4 games, that's going to give me a lot more confidence that Michigan State can without a doubt get back to being a bowl caliber team. And now all of a sudden they're a lot more attractive to recruits and portal players. Hey, look, man, look what we're doing here. Come play for us.
That's going to be the biggest thing. They need a little bit more consistency at quarterback, because I like the ceiling of Aiden Childs. I mean, big old 6'3" kid, 225. I think he had a lot of potential. But then you go and you look, and his games were very, very back and forth. He's dueling with BC.
So inconsistent.
That's the biggest issue, man. I mean, he's against USC on the road in a loss. I mean, 12 of 21, 212 yards, 3 touchdowns, no picks, 31 rushing yards, and a touchdown.
Yep.
And then against Nebraska, he goes 9 of 23 for 85 yards and 2 picks.
Game.
It
was the next game. Trev, to your point, he has a 3-game stretch against BC, Youngstown State, and USC where he throws 8 touchdown passes and has 1 pick and averages over 9 yards per attempt. Well over 60 yards, close to 70%, or well over 60%, close to 70% completion rate. Has a 231-yard pass performance, a 270-yard pass performance, and a 212-yard pass performance. Again, over 9 yards per pass attempt. Also, in that stretch, ran for 140-something yards and 2 more touchdowns. And you and I are talking like, hey, we were right. He's going to be that dude. We liked Aiden Childs. We love his talent. The next 2 games against Nebraska and UCLA, he goes 17 of 40, no touchdowns and 3 interceptions, and only has 32 rushing yards. He did rush for 3 touchdowns. Then they go on the road to Indiana, and he goes 27 of 33 for 243 yards and a touchdown, no picks against Indiana, 48 rushing yards. And then the next week against Michigan goes 14 of 28 for 138 yards. There was no more schizophrenic quarterback in college football last year than Aiden Childs. And it was frustrating because you see the highs and you're like, that's a dude. And then you see the lows and you're like, he shouldn't even be on scholarship.
Yeah.
I mean, it was the most bizarre season I've seen in a long time from a quarterback with his talent level.
100%. If Alicio Milivojevic can just be steady, if you can just be a consistent player where you might not necessarily have the highest of highs and have that type of completion percentage against Indiana on the road, but you're also not 9 of 23 with 2 picks against Nebraska. If you can just live in the gray and live within the system, and the run game can take a step up, I like Michigan State's chances to be bowl eligible this year. But I'm with you. A lot's going to be riding on that kid at quarterback.
Yep. Agreed. That's going to be a big part of it, Trev, for that team this season. So what will Pat Fitzgerald's team be in 2026? We don't know. I do think this is a team that, as a Notre Dame fan, you should be hope that a lot of these questions get answered positively, because when you talk about the Notre Dame schedule and you talk about the strength of schedule and you talk about the arguments about where they should be seated, if they're 12-0, if they're 11-1, or can they get in at 10-2, all those kind of type of arguments, there's very clearly 3 good teams that need to be good. But you need some of these other teams, the Wisconsins, the Michigan States, the North Carolinas, to be better than expected. 6-6 Michigan State doesn't necessarily mean, but hey, look, we beat a really improved Michigan State team. Yeah, dude, they were 6-6 and you beat them by 40. But could they be even better than that? They a 7-win team? Could they be an 8-win team? Listen, here's the reality. We've seen Pat Fitzgerald have rosters with less talent than the one he has this year go to a bowl game.
Oh, yeah.
At Northwestern. Now, that was also an established when the program was established, that he hasn't established the culture here. But if you're a Notre Dame fan, you want Michigan State to be back. If for any other reason, you just, you want another counter to the top teams in the Big Ten. You want another team that's good enough to knock them off some weekends. For anything else, it's just another kind of gnat in the, flying around the head of Ohio State, Oregon, Indiana, and Michigan and teams like that, where they can get upset by those teams occasionally, and which helps Notre Dame, of course. But and then also for someone like me, Trev, it's just I'd like this rivalry to come back, and if Michigan State can be good, maybe that gives Notre Dame more incentive to schedule something more long term. I don't know that Michigan State would want to do that. I don't know. Right now, it's not happening because they don't have an AD or a school president. But down the road, maybe it's something that we see.
Brian, we have a daily mailbag to take us the rest of the way here on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. And if this does happen to be your first mailbag, you can put MB for mailbag or a mailbox emoji prior to your submission. It lets us know to set that question aside. Super chats get bumped up to the top. We prefer that the questions be geared towards, and really they don't even have to be questions. We covered a lot of different topics. We would like to hear what your top 10 defensive player rankings are. We'd like to hear what your thoughts are on the top offenses that Notre Dame plays. All those are fair game in the mailbag today, but I'm looking forward to it.
All right, let's get started here with a question from Tommy Guns.
Do you think that Patty Fitz will try and be able to eventually kind of recreate the Stanford playbook of being a power run team while everyone else moves to defend more spread offenses in the Big Ten?
You know, I don't think this kind of goes back to the conversation we were having earlier, Trevor. There's an off-season story that's a little bit, what story are you trying to tell here? And on one hand, you go out and get this talented, productive running back in Cam Edwards, who's a 5'11", 205, 210, got some power, elusiveness, and he's a bit of a one-cut guy, but real good back. You go out there, get these massive offensive linemen from the portal, 6'2", 350, 6'7", 340, and then you go out and get an offensive coordinator that comes from a coach who's been he was with him at Washington, he was with him at Indiana, he was with him at Alabama, that plays in an offense that is borderline allergic to running the football. It's bizarre. Is Nick Sheridan so much of a disciple of Kalen DeBoer that's what he tries to do? Or this is also true. I've coached on offenses where we ran the ball more than I would like to run the football. I would have thrown the ball more. So my offense would have looked different if I was running it. We still would have had some of the principles and lessons that I learned, but if I was running it, we would not have thrown the ball. You know what I mean? It's like the West Coast. There's West Coast offenses that run the ball all the time and West Coast offenses that throw the ball all the time. And you look like, okay, there's like 4 different disciples of Mike Holmgren that all ran their version of the West Coast different than how Mike Holmgren ran it. So that's a bit of an unknown at this point in time, Trev. We don't really know what a Nick Sheridan led version of that offense will be. That's a big question that I have. And look, Pat Fitzgerald was not a 21 personnel Stanford clone at Northwestern. They were a spread team because they didn't have the talent to do anything other than that. So I don't think they're going to look like the Stanford team. I think philosophically, should they be sort of that balance but be a downhill running team? That they should adopt, but not they won't do it the way that Stanford did it, just because that's not Nick Sheridan's DNA, at least that we know of, and it's not in Pat Fitzgerald's DNA that we know of.
Yeah, I mean, nor do I think that they necessarily have to. I understand the point that you're trying to make, Tommy Guns, but Stanford did it to combat teams like Oregon and Oklahoma State and teams that would really spread it out and go crazy. Or not Oklahoma State, Oregon State, and teams like that would spread the ball around and run and gun. We've actually seen Big Ten teams like Oregon have to transfer and get accustomed to the style of play in the Big Ten, and they have to do a better job of establishing the run. We watched Dan Lanning and Lincoln Riley both put more emphasis into the run game this past year. Because the Big Ten's not as run and gun as what the old school Pac-12 was when Stanford made that switch, in my opinion. So plus, Pat Fitzgerald is a head coach that has coached in the Big Ten for a while. So he understands the style of play as well. I'm more so with Brian in that, the question isn't, will they be Stanford? It's just, what will it be? That's going to be fascinating to watch unfold.
Yep. Agree.
Super chat from Beezer12 Washingbeard. Appreciate you, Bees. Not on topic. I won't be here for the mailbag on Friday. So how far back could you go with Notre Dame starting quarterbacks, excluding Drew Pine, that could win a title with this team?
assuming the O-line is as good as we think it's going to be, the skill talent is as good as we hope it's going to be, and the defense is as good as we hope it can be, you can go back pretty far, capable of winning it. Now, would I predict them to win it? Would I predict them to win it with Riley Leonard? Yeah. I think they'd have a great shot to win a title this year. He'd have a better offensive line around him. They wouldn't be as good at running back, but still more than good enough. He'd have a better receiving core around him, and there's a good chance that the defense is going to be better, certainly more talented than the one Riley Leonard had. So he's a yes. I think Sam Hartman would enjoy playing on this offense way more than the one he played on in 2023.
Yeah.
He wouldn't be getting his face beat in every week from an offensive line that didn't know how to pass block half the time. Tyler Buckner, if healthy for an entire season, maybe. I mean, we just saw the guy start 3 games in his career. It's hard to say that one. Jack Cohn, maybe. It'd be harder, but I mean, I think Jack on this team, he led Notre Dame to an 11-1 record, and threw for 500 yards in the bowl game. I mean, I think Jack would be in the conversation. Ian Book would be in the conversation. Brandon Wimbush, if he had real coaching his entire career as a quarterback's coach, maybe. But I mean, Mike Denbrock showed you put Brandon Wimbush in an offense that looked a little bit like the one we saw in 2024. I think he could thrive there. Deshaun Kaiser, yes. From a talent standpoint, no. From a leadership standpoint, but I don't think Marcus Freeman would allow Deshaun Kaiser to be the person he was then. Malik Zaire, yes. Everett Golson, yes. And that's when it ends. 2011 and 2010 did not. Jimmy Clausen, yes. Brady Quinn, yes. Jarius Jackson, yes. Ron Paulus, maybe. Yeah, I think Buddy and I were arguing the other day because he hates Ron Paulus and because he was a bust and all this. And I said, look, man, Ron Paulus was a drop back quarterback that Lou Holtz said we're gonna change the offense for you, and he never changed the offense. Ron Paulus should not have been running the triple option offense. I still believe, no matter what you think of Ron Paulus now or whatever, Ron Paulus would have been much better in an offense that allowed him to drop back and throw the football and not have him running the option all the time.
Most definitely.
So, I mean, there's a lot of quarterbacks that you could have a chance with this team. But there's a difference in having a chance if everything goes right and you're winning it because of that quarterback. If the answer is they're going to win because of the quarterback, that answer is a lot smaller. It's like Riley Leonard, Jimmy, Brady, Jarius, Paulus. You know what I mean? It's those kind of guys. It's a much smaller list.
Yeah.
You're winning with them or because of them. That's what changes the size of that list.
Yeah, without a doubt. I don't know how many of those guys that we just listed off outside of the final guys that you mentioned would be favorites to win the Heisman on FanDuel like what CJ Carr is. But with the team encompassing, it'd be possible for them to do it. But the context is different.
All right, we got one. We got a two-parter here. Here's one from Tommy. A couple from Tommy Guns. This one is not related to what we're talked about, but the next one is a pretty decent one.
New weekly question: which holiday meal does Michigan State represent for the Notre Dame O and D lines?
I mean, I really hope this isn't a new weekly question because I don't really want to think about this for all 12 teams. But I'll give this one a try. So, this is it's not a great meal, but it's, here I'll go. Dry turkey. You can handle it, a little tough, you got to work through it a little bit, but you punish it, you eat it all because it's still turkey. If you're someone like me that likes turkey, they put a little bit of gravy on it, something like that. And you power through it, you get it done because I'm going to beat this turkey. I'm better than this turkey, but it's tough. You got to work through it. It's got some little gristle in there. You got to work through a little bit, It's the best I can come up with, Tommy. And I really hope you don't ask this for the next nine weeks.
I think holiday meal, I'm going to go with green bean casserole because it can go one of two ways. People are either going to think it's really good or it sucks.
And you never know what it's going to be. And it's green.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's a good one, Trev. It's a very good one.
Thank you.
Now here's a better question from Tommy Guns.
Since Navy was mentioned, how do you think the triple option, especially with a more passing flair, work out of pistol formation? Do any of the academies use pistol? I don't remember. And then he went on to say, would it make defending them more difficult?
So I coached in a pistol triple option offense. I don't know that the coach knew how to run it overly well, but there are some things you can do out of it. Air Force runs the pistol from time to time. Navy will run it. We saw them with Blake Horvath. They ran some pistol. You have to change things. You can't block it the same way you block the triple because it doesn't hit quick enough. You know, when you're doing the mesh out of under center, you're doing the mesh at the line of scrimmage. It makes it harder for that defensive end to play both. The issue that our coach had is he would move everybody up a little bit, but you're still hitting that mesh from too far back. So two things are happening. Number one is it gives that defensive end a little bit more room to squeeze on the ball carrier when you hand it off. And then when the quarterback pulls, he's 3.5 yards behind the line of scrimmage, 3 yards behind the line of scrimmage. So you can't run the true triple the way that you did. You're more of now a spread read zone team. You're running it like the read zone, not the pure dive mesh, things like that. You have to do it a little bit differently. And you also have to be able to throw the ball out of it. You have to have some RPOs out of it. You have to have some different. You're not going to run like a true triple out of it because you're just starting from too far back. It doesn't hit quick enough. So like the school I ran it at, they had he thought it worked because they had success in it at Thomas More, but they had way better players than everybody else in their league, and then they go to the playoffs and get worked. When he went to Defiance, he didn't have the players he didn't have the best players in the league anymore. And it got exposed. And then I kept trying to explain to him why it wasn't working the way it was working. He wouldn't ever listen. And that's why he ended up getting fired a year or two later. But yeah, it just the timing doesn't work. Running the triple out of it. But Navy didn't run the triple out of it. Navy ran like traps and dives and kind of read zone type of plays. It was different than they had a pistol play sheet, where the play calls out of pistol were not the same from under center necessarily. There are some plays you can do trap out of both. There's some things you can do out of both, but they didn't try to run the triple out of the pistol because they're not stupid. And in that instance, it can work, but you can't run the triple out of it.
Agreed. Timing's all weird and messed up. Right. I know they're not a service academy, but Rice also runs like a little bit of that as well. But theirs is more like speed option out of the pistol. It's not.
Nevada used to kill people with the pistol with Colin, and they ran a pistol version of the triple option, but it's more read zone. I mean, that's the thing. Read zone is the triple option in a different alignment with different blocking scheme. You're running more zone or traps or things like that, as opposed to, the veer and midline and stuff like that, where it's got to hit quick, and that's why it has to be under center. But you remember that under Chris Alt? I mean, they had a great running game out of the pistol, and Rice has some of that to them as well, Trev, to your point. Yeah. But it's not the triple option. It's not. And by triple, that has a very distinct. Look, an RPO is a triple option play. You have 3 options: run, pass, or hand off, you run, or you pass it. The read zone is technically a triple option play. You have 3 options. But when you say triple option, you're referring to a specific set of type of plays: midline and veer, which the blocking scheme is very different from the stuff you're talking about, Trev, with Rice, because we kind of talked about they're kind of a triple option team, but not really. And so when we say triple option, but not really, it's like it is kind of the same principles philosophically, but schematically it's different. And that's why I say you really can't do that. And it would actually make them easier to defend because everything that they're doing is from 3 yards behind from where they'd be doing it now.
Yep.
And I think that's been part of the issue the Air Force has had. They're trying to be more shotgun, pistol based, and it's not working for them.
From Black Irish 864, if Big Game James was still at Penn State, would the recruitment of Henderson been a bit harder for all teams involved?
No, Penn State wouldn't have been a factor in that one. I don't think. They didn't go down to Florida a whole lot. When they did, it was when Jaywan Sider was there. And he's not there anymore. So no, I don't think it would have changed that one. Some other recruitments might have been more challenging. Maybe Abraham Cisse was more challenging. Maybe some of those are more challenging, but not that one.
From Jay Melvin, Brian, how high are you on Vandrevius Jacobs? I thought that was a very underrated pickup for Miami. I was talking about this with Brian Smith the other day, and he loves his twitch and speed.
I mean, we've talked about him a lot, Jay Melvin. Trev had him on his second team, all opponent team. You know, we talked about the success he had at South Carolina. I mean, I think that was a heck of a pickup. It's part of the reason that we think they have the best receiving core in college football this year. It's not because they have the best 1-2 punch. I think that's actually somewhat debatable. Not that they're not very good there. It's just like, I think there you can kind of debate the Texas 1-2 punch. You can debate the Ohio State 1-2 punch. The
Clemson 1-2 punch.
Clemson. There's groups that you could say, well, hey, 1-2, we can compete with you. But then after that, you've got Vandrevius Jacobs, you've got Cam Vaughn, you've got Josh Moore. You know, so, but as far as Jacobs, I think he's a very good player. I think that was a very underrated pickup. And he wasn't their leading receiver last year from a yard standpoint, but he was their leading receiver. That was Nick Harbor, but he was their leading receiver last year from a catches standpoint with 32. So, yeah, he's a good football player.
Yeah.
Yeah, he can do a lot. He can stretch the field. He can make plays after the catch. He had 100-yard games last year against Missouri, Kentucky, and Clemson. The reason his numbers weren't more impressive is because he had 0 catches against Virginia Tech, 0 against Bama, 0 against Ole Miss, 0 against Coastal Carolina, 1 against Oklahoma. Part of it is he's got to stay healthier. But when he played and got snaps, he produced. So I think that was a very, very good pickup. Like Cam Vaughn's a good football player, but he's more of that like complimentary guy, good athlete, but not an elite athlete, good route runner, but not an elite route runner. Vandrevius actually could be a number 2 to Malachi Toney if they didn't get Cooper.
Yeah.
I'd still be fired up about this Miami receiving core, even if they didn't get Cooper and Darian Mensah the way that they did, which I think was shady how they did it. But if it's just Malachi Toney, Vandrevius Jacobs, Cam Vaughn, Josh Moore, and the Wingo freshman, the freshman, that's still the best receiving core that Notre Dame's going to face this year. This is just kind of cheating. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, okay, now you guys are just not even being fair to the rest of the receiving cores. You know what I mean? Like you got him too, but that was a great pickup.
100%.
That's why. And of the two, Trev, I think we talked about this. If I told you, hey, Trev, dude, you can't afford freaking Miami receivers on your all opponent teams. You got to take one of them off. I have a feeling he wouldn't be the one you'd take off.
No, I take off Cam Vaughn.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
From Time Cone, the name that we got verified yesterday. Is it true that Tiger and Bear Bachmeier's older brother is named Lion?
No. The older brother's name is Hank. He played quarterback at Boise State.
I was just about to say, I was like, it's either Lion or something like Hank.
Huh?
Like his older brother's name. Like the older brother name was either going to be something like Lion or something like that, or it was going to be very basic, like Hank.
So they have a younger brother whose nickname, I think his name is Buck. I'm actually going to look that up, but his nickname is Cougar. Let me look that up real quick. So yeah, Hank was the older brother. Buck. His name is Buck Bachmeier. Buck Bachmeier, and his nickname is Cougar. Yeah, it's pretty funny.
Jeez.
And Bear and Tiger's names are Bear and Tiger. I don't believe they're nicknames. Bucks is a nickname. Cougar is a nickname for Buck. But yes,
we got some names I'll run by Lauren when she gets home from work.
And then Hank. What?
That's why I've always appreciated the St. Brown family, because they bought into Osiris.
I mean, they went all
in.
Yeah,
and they went you can't have Equanimous, Amon-Ra, and Sheldon.
Yeah,
like you know what I mean?
Larry, Bill. Yeah, you can't. Or that's just more of like their mama's German. She's like, you get 2. If we have a third, that's going to be mine. So it's like Equanimous and Amon and Osiris, and then the third one is Fritz. You know what I mean? Like Bjorn, something like that. Could you imagine Amon-Ra? His name was like Fritz St. Brown, same guy, but his name is Fritz. But no, I mean, but to your point, they were consistent with it.
Yep.
Yeah, they were consistent with it.
Love
That's
it.
funny. That's really good.
From J. Melvin Bryant, do you think if there would have been a 14 playoff in 2013, Michigan State would have won the national championship that year?
No. They were a really good team. They didn't have a good enough offense to compete with Florida State. No. I'm actually going to look at the 2013 college football polls because I'm wondering what the seeding would have been in the final ranking. Because let me see here, coaches poll. Where's the AP poll? The AP BCS standings. Here we go. Michigan State would have been 4, so they wouldn't have even had a warm-up game. They would have got Florida State in round 1, and they would have lost that game. Yeah. And then Florida State would have played the winner of Alabama-Auburn. Now,
yeah,
that's why I don't like that's one good aspect to having a committee, because the committee can bump Michigan State up. Oh, we're going to bump them up to 3 and Bama to 4 so we don't get an Auburn-Alabama rematch in the very next game that those teams play. Pass. But yeah, that was the kick 6 was 14, right?
No, that was 13.
13. It was kick 6 was 13. Yeah.
That 13 was a crazy year because they had the miracle of Jordan Hare where they converted like a 4th and 19 for a touchdown, and then a couple weeks later had the kick 6. That was an insane year.
And had Florida State down big early before Florida State woke up. But no, now Florida State wouldn't have scored 50 points against them. That was a great Michigan State defense and a really good secondary. But the problem with Michigan State in 2013 would have been their offense. They weren't a great. I'm actually pulling up their stats from that year. They were not a great offense that year. They put up some points against some bad teams in the Big Ten, but there's a reason they only scored 13 points against Notre Dame. They finished the year with scoring 29 points a game. Connor Cook was okay. Jeremy Langford was a good back. Receiving core, Benny Fowler, Tony Lippett. I mean, they had good talent, but they were just very conservative offensively.
That was Max Bulla's senior year at Michigan State, wasn't it?
Believe so. Yeah, believe so. 2013, was his last year. 76 tackles, 10 tackles for loss.
That'll play.
Yep. He was a very good player at Michigan State. Very good player.
Another one from J. Melvin. Brian, do you buy into the belief that Nick Marsh or Charlie Becker are a top 10 or top 5 receivers?
Top 10, yes. As a duo, top 10 for sure. Top 5, I'd have to think more about that one. I think Nick Marsh is a good football player. I do. I don't think he's the player some people make him out to be.
Agreed.
I think Charlie Becker is a very good football player, but do we know if he's that guy or is he a great compliment when you've got, the 2 kids they had last year? That's the debate. He was always their third receiver. He was always getting single covered. Because they had Omar Cooper and Elijah Surratt. Can he be that guy when he's the guy? We'll find out. I think he's got the chance. He had some money catches. And it wasn't like he was catching wide open catches either, Trev. It wasn't like, well, they're just not covering. Like how Will Pauling at times was putting up numbers. You're like, is there anybody covering that guy? Because there's nobody else on the screen. He was making he was mossing dudes, making one. I mean, so I'm not trying to act like Charlie isn't a really good player, but there's being a really good player, and then you can be the number 1. Some guys are great compliments. Yeah. Ed McCaffrey was a great compliment to Rod Smith and Shannon Sharp, but when he had to be the number 1 on teams, he wasn't as good. Or even the number 2 on teams, he wasn't as good.
We saw that at the next level, to your point about the NFL. We saw that with Juju Smith-Schuster. He was a much more productive wide receiver with the Steelers when Antonio Brown was opposite of him. And then when he had to be the guy, he was fine.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that's okay. That's not an insult. That's just the reality.
Oh, you need it all, 100% when you're building out a receiving core.
But top 10, as of what we know about, top 10, I have no problem saying top 10. That's a good 1-2 punch. But top 5, I mean, you're talking about John, Jeremiah Smith and whoever is the number 2 there. You're talking about
Cam Coleman, Ryan Wingo.
You're just talking about top 2. That's a good one. And is it even Ryan Wingo or is it Cam Coleman and Emmett Mosley?
Yeah.
I mean, that's, you look at Clemson with Bryant Wesco and TJ Moore. You look at Miami with, Cooper Barcotti and Malachi Toney. I mean, like there's a lot of, if Evan Stewart's healthy and him and DeCorian Moore, there's a debate to be had. There's some very good 1-2 punches at receiver in college football this year. If we're just talking about the top two, if you talk about the Indiana receiving corps as a whole, it's clearly not top 5, but I'd still say top 10. But just 1-2 punch at the top, sure, that's. Now Indiana had that last year because you had those three, plus you had EJ Williams, who had a nice year last year. So their receiving core as a whole last year was definitely top 5. I just don't know that this duo is top 5. But it's very good. Don't get it twisted, Jay Melvin. We're not saying it's not good. It's just not, to me, as good as what it was last year.
Agreed.
And then he said, what about either one individually? Neither one of them are top 5 receivers individually.
No.
And that's, if Charlie Becker is as good as the number 1 as he was as the number 3 last year, he's still not a top 5 receiver. There's a lot of very good receivers in college football. I mean, elite receivers in college football this year.
Yeah.
Good question.
From Sine Cosine Tangent, what is going on at Michigan State with their school leadership? I haven't heard anything.
So I'll give you a very brief of what I've been able to read situation. So within the last month, the school president and the AD both left. The AD left in part because the president left, because the president hired him. There's a rogue board member, too, kind of, that the school had asked, because the governor, I guess, is the one that can fire board members. And they asked Gretchen Whitmer to get rid of this person in 2024. She declined. There's pressure on her again to get rid of this guy and a gal and that are the board. They've been under investigation. They've had to pay millions of dollars in legal fees to deal with their investigation. And they don't get paid. Like, board members don't get paid, but she's like been accused of funneling money and funds into herself. It's a whole mess. It's been a lot of drama every time she gets accused of doing something wrong. It's racism, and it's just been a lot of drama. And the school president is like, I'm out. And the AD was like, well, if he's out, I'm out. And Kentucky just hired the AD. I think the president, where did he go? Was it Florida? I can't remember. So there's no leadership at the top, and there's just all these lawsuits, and there's just all this drama going on, and it's a mess. It really is a mess.
Yeah, that's not great.
Yep. And Jay Melvin, that is a board question. I'm not going to get into the Caden Henderson recruitment right now. I'll go on with Sean at 5:05. I will briefly mention the latest with that, but I'm going to mainly leave that to let's let the dust settle, and we'll see kind of how things shake out. So, a lot of drama. We'll see how it plays out.
For sure.
Last one here we got from Mark Rukavina. Says Brian, you need a new T-shirt for Get Gap Closer. How about Gap Closed? I love that idea. I actually have a Gap Closed shirt that I will have that I will wear if one thing happens and one thing only. If Notre Dame signs the number 1 player in the country at every position, I'm still not wearing it. Here's the reality. Yes, they're recruiting at an elite level. Yes, they have a roster as good as anybody in the country. And in theory, talent-wise, they've closed the gap. But you know what the teams at the top have done in the last 20 years that 25 years of Notre Dame has not done? Win a title. The gap is not closed until they win a title. That's that in my view. Now, have they closed the gap in the ability to, hey, we can recruit anybody, anywhere, anytime? Yes, they have done that. And in some ways, they've closed the gap. We think they have the best roster in college football. They've closed the talent gap. The talent gap is done, right? Talent gap is closed. But I'm not doing a gap closed shirt until they win the title. Because otherwise, you're just bragging about winning. That's like A&M saying, we're number 1 shirts because they had the number 1 ranked recruiting class. Well, what was your record that year on the football field? So in some ways, I support the notion that Notre Dame has closed the gap talent-wise. There's no more excuses for Notre Dame to say, well, we're just not talented enough. we can't do this, we can't do that, this isn't fair. We're always playing behind the 8 ball. Nope, all that's gone. All that's gone. Their talent is as good as anybody in the country, in my opinion. Now, are they just clearly ahead of everyone else, like Georgia was in 21 and 22, or Bama was in certain years, or Clemson was in 18, or LSU was in 9? No, they're not that, because there's other really good talented teams. But their talent level everywhere is on board with the best teams in college football. So in that regard, you want to say gap is closed? Cool. But for me and for Irish Breakdown, you will not see any gap closed shirts on our store or on our shows until that final clock in the championship game is 0-0-0 and Notre Dame has more points than the other team. That's when we'll do it. And believe me, that shirt will go up on the store, but I will be wearing it in the postgame show.
I was about to say, you better get it ironed then for January 25th, brother.
I'm going to get it in this performance shirt. I'm going to get a new one in this performance shirt because I don't have to worry about ironing it, because these shirts do not wrinkle the way that other shirts do. They're beautiful.
Well, there you go.
So, yeah.
There you go.
That'll do it for today, Trev.
Folks, another really great midweek rundown here on the Irish Breakdown podcast. Like Brian said, here in a little bit over an hour, he'll be hopping on at 5:05 p.m. with IB Nation Sports Beat. Talk through some Notre Dame recruiting. Not going to want to miss that one. On your way out of this show, be sure to hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit that notification bell. Share this podcast with your friends, family, anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. But as always, best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Brian and I will be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. Not going to want to miss that show either. But until then, it's Brian, I'm Trevor. See you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown podcast.